This is Dream On, a Croft and Tabby short, Book 5, written by Brad Magnarella, narrated by James Patrick Cronin. Chapter 1. I was putting the finishing touches on a casting circle when Tabitha's yellow-green eyes appeared above the ladder to my lab. "Whatever it is, not now," I said. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Who peed in your coffee?" "Since you mention it, you did, 2 days ago." "Oh," her whiskers twitched. "Well, you were behaving like a tyrant. By asking you to please stop tearing my new curtains to shreds, like I have any control over my feline instincts. You put me in this body." We'd had this exact conversation at least 700 times, and I wasn't about to make it 701. Lips compressed, I made a slight adjustment to the copper filings with a tiny spade tool. She scowled. "What are you even doing?" "Something very delicate." I glanced between the circle and the open book I'd confiscated the night before. An amateur had used it to call up a creature that looked disturbingly brownie-like. I was trying to determine whether it had been a fluke or if the particular design was actually reaching into fairy, something my order would want to know. But I needed to get the circle's intricate design exactly right. Tabitha made a disconsolate noise as she finished her climb up the ladder. From the side of my mouth, I said, "You can stay as long as it's silently and out of the way." She hopped onto the iron table and regarded my work. "Hideous," she declared. "I'm serious. You shouldn't even be breathing right now." With a huff, she collapsed onto her side at the table's edge, the gust from her hairy bulk blowing my circle askew. I sighed. "Or do that." She blinked at me innocently. "Do what, darling?" I set my utensil aside and straightened. There was no point continuing until I had the lab to myself again. Retrieving a large mixing bowl from a shelf, I turned it over and placed it carefully over the circle. "So, to what do I owe the pleasure of your company?" "Boredom." She licked a paw with studied indifference. "Really? I thought your sole amusements were eating, sleeping, and judging me." I wasn't trying to be funny. We'd had no cases together since the nursing home from hell on Staten Island, and in the months since, she'd seemed to luxuriate in the growing depression in her divan, more content than I'd ever seen her. "I'm ready for an outing," she stated. That was nothing short of shocking. "Okay. Where were you thinking?" "Oh, I don't know." She released an exaggerated yawn, displaying her mouth full of predatory teeth. "How about Coney Island? I haven't been there in over a century." As I connected the dots, I nearly burst out laughing. Minutes before, I'd heard her thud down to the floor and saunter into the kitchen in search of leftovers from last night's filet mignon. On the way back, she'd searched the table where I'd left that morning's edition of the New York Gazette. A pull-out section featured an article on Coney Island's cuisine. Number 2, right below Nathan's famous hot dogs, was Minnie's Mermaid Tails. "Gee, I don't know," I said, scratching my chin. "The only thing you despise more than smiles are screams of delight." "Yes, but it's the end of the season and a weekday. The little brats will be in school." I nodded toward the bay windows. "It's unseasonably chilly today, and I know how much you hate the cold." "The sun's out," she countered, her tail flicking impatiently. "I'll be fine." I could have kept going, but I didn't get the same kick out of psychological torment that she did. "You know those aren't real mermaid tails, right?" Her eyes widened in surprise before narrowing again. "What are you talking about?" A droplet of drool betrayed her. She tried to hide it with a paw, but only succeeded in smearing it over the tabletop. "Mermaid tails," I repeated. "I heard you the first time," she snapped, losing 2 more droplets. "Well, if you had bothered to actually read the article, you'd know they're made from whitefish, breaded, stamped into their novelty shapes, and fried. You'd be eating fish sticks, basically." She squinted one eye as she took that in. "I've eaten worse," she decided, "including that excuse for a beef Wellington you forced down my throat last week." I considered my overturned mixing bowl and then the bay windows again. I could probably use the break. It was nice out, even if a bit on the cool side, and I hadn't been to Coney Island since I was a kid. "Okay," I said, But there will be rules, she moaned. Here we go. 1, you can have a single mermaid tail, no more. They're large, loaded with grease, and you eat enough as it is. Compared to you, maybe, with the appetite of an ant. 2, you'll stay in your carrier at all times. I'm not going to risk you sneaking a bite of someone's soul again. How am I supposed to eat? I'll feed you through the door. Like a zoo animal? And 3, we take a ride on the Wonder Wheel. Her eyes flashed with panic. What? No, I'll get motion sick. Well, there's no point in visiting Coney Island if we don't go on at least one ride. Those are the terms. Take 'em or leave 'em. She glared at me, her tail lashing over the table. Then she stood, arching her back in a long, lazy stretch that seemed calculated to show how little she actually cared. Fine, she said at last. But if I get ill, I'll be aiming for your pants, and I'll expect 2 mermaid tails to replace the one I lost. How could I say no to that? Deal. Chapter 2. Finally, Tabitha muttered as I stepped off the subway and onto the raised platform at the Stillwell Avenue station. If I'd known the trip was going to take half the day, I certainly wouldn't have bothered. It was 1 hour, I said, shifting her carrier to my other hand. And you slept for most of it. Yes, well, I was conserving my muscles of mastication. Why are we just standing here? Move, human! I much preferred her asleep. I'd even managed to grade a few papers. As I exited the station, the sun shone from a bright, cloudless sky. Even so, Coney Island at season's end exuded a certain melancholy, not abandoned, but far from the summer crush I remembered from when my grandmother had taken me. Absent were the sweating masses and hordes of kids, no ecstatic screams either, just a few bundled-up adults and the forlorn cries of seagulls. But the towering sight of the Wonder Wheel looming off to our left pulled my mouth into a dreamy smile. I wish you could see how cretinous you look, Tabitha said. I peered down to find her eyes angled up at me through the mesh door. Yeah, God forbid anyone should appear amused at an amusement park, I muttered. It's just the dopey way you're doing it. You look like a concussed cow. It so happens that that's the first ride I ever went on. I pointed to the Wonder Wheel with my cane. I would have been 6 or 7. I recalled how Nana had been worried it would scare me, clutching me to her side the moment our gondola had begun sliding back and forth on its track as designed. But I'd loved it, so much so that I convinced her to let me ride it a second time. Tabitha regarded it with a contemptuous sneer. I was hoping you'd forgotten. My smile returned. Not a chance, Buttercup. I tapped my cane jauntily past the Luna Park roller coaster, around a garden, and onto the famed boardwalk that overlooked Coney Island Beach. At the railing, I closed my eyes and inhaled the Atlantic's scent. The ocean breeze flapped the hem of my cinched trench coat and stirred up more pleasant memories. What in the hell do you think you're doing? Tabitha demanded. We're here for the Mermaid Tails. Tail, I corrected her. And it's only 11. We have time. In case I haven't made it clear, I will smother you in your sleep. So you say, but you've yet to come close. Yet being the operative term. I set her carrier down. Where are you going? She demanded as I strolled along the railing. Between the demands of teaching and wizarding, I couldn't remember the last time I'd taken a day off, and the memories around this place. I hadn't expected them to be so rich. They cascaded into emotions around Nana, who'd raised me. There wasn't a day I didn't miss her, but today felt especially... Help! Tabitha cried. I've been kidnapped by a creep who's trying to sell me to the freak show. I rushed back and seized her carrier. All right, I hissed. We'll get your stupid mermaid tail. She smiled smugly. That's more like it. When an elderly couple doubled back toward us, I called out, It's okay, I'm an aspiring ventriloquist. With an awkward chuckle, I rotated the carrier so they could see Tabitha. It's just my very normal cat. They huffed in annoyance and continued walking. I waited until they were out of earshot before lowering my voice. Do that again and we're leaving. I was just having a little fun, darling. This is an amusement park. I set my jaw at her skillful use of my own words against me. I'm serious. Well, you can be serious while carrying me to Minnie's. It's that way. A pointing claw appeared through the door. With a sigh, I set off, scanning the boardwalk's quaint storefronts and signs. I soon zeroed in on a small restaurant with a faded blue awning. A wooden mermaid, her paint chipped and weathered, extended the length of the rooftop, but Minnie's was shuttered, its metal security gate locked. "Appears to be closed," I said. "I can see that," Tabitha hissed. "Why is it closed?" "Well, let's see." I stooped to read the posted hours. Huh. They were supposed to open at 10. I checked my mental calendar to ensure this wasn't a holiday, but no, just a regular working day. "Then use your magic to break down the door," Tabitha said through grinding teeth. "What will that accomplish? Closed is closed." It was a little odd, though, considering the write-up in that morning's paper. "Let me out." "Tabitha, we're not going to raid their kitchen and start up the fryers." "Speak for yourself. I was promised Mermaid Tails." "Tail," I said, my exasperation returning, but I did feel a little bad for her. I knew that kind of disappointment, like having my heart set on a mug of morning coffee only to discover my cat had used the beans as a litter box. Okay, scratch the feeling bad for her part, but I didn't need her creating another scene. "Why don't we stop for a minute and consider our options?" I said. "There are other restaurants." "I didn't come all this way to gag on a hot dog," she snapped. "Other restaurants besides Nathan's?" I snapped back. When I noticed someone in my peripheral vision, I spun around to find a middle-aged man standing way too close. Vintage glasses magnified a pair of intense eyes, while dark, unkempt hair joined a scraggly beard. I recognized him as one of the onlookers who had witnessed Tabitha's earlier outburst. "Yes," I said irritably. "Can I help you?" He adjusted his tweed coat, which hung limply over a shaggy blue sweater, a plaid collar poking from the top. Raising a hand to show he was harmless, he cleared his throat. "Sorry, mate. Didn't mean to startle you," he said in a coarse English accent. "Was just going to say that Minnie didn't turn up today." "No?" I looked from him to the locked door, feeling like a jerk for barking at him. "Is that unusual?" "For Minnie, I'd say it is, yeah. Can't remember the last time she done that." "Do you work here?" I asked. Nah, but I'm around quite a lot. Up and down the boardwalk mostly. Probably why they call me Boardwalk Benny." His unkempt state and peeling loafers suggested he may have lived under the boardwalk as well. "I'm, Everson Croft," I said. "And this is my cat, Tabitha." Crooked teeth flashed through his beard as he stooped to look through the door. "Ha! Yes, the ventriloquist's dummy." She snarled back at him, the sound morphing into a four-letter word. "We had our stomachs set on Minnie's Mermaid Tails," I said, loud enough to cover her expletive as I jerked her carrier to my other side. "Is there somewhere around here that sells the equivalent?" He straightened. "Might try Neptune's Bounty. They're down that way. Serve a decent fish and chips." "Okay, thanks. We'll check it out." He bowed slightly, tipping an imaginary hat. "But they're closed, too." I stopped and turned. "You're kidding. They didn't show up either?" "That's the word on the wood." He tapped a loafer against the boardwalk and flashed his disarming smile. "Is there a food workers' strike or something?" He shrugged. "Not that I've heard. Might try talking to Madame Mysteria." "Let me guess," I said, the smartass in me coming out. "Fortune teller." "Works in the park there." He jutted his chin. "She's gotten pretty good lately." "Okay, thanks," I said, half expecting him to tell me she was off too, but this time he didn't call after me. "Well," I said to Tabitha, "should we just head back to the city?" There was no way she would let me enjoy myself, much less ride the Wonder Wheel, not after having been deprived of her stomach's desire. "No, I demand answers. I want to speak to this Madame Mysteria." I raised the pet carrier so I could see her. "You're being serious right now?" Her eyes hardened. "You're always dragging me along on your cases." "Right, when someone's life is in danger. This is over novelty fish sticks." "There are already 2 victims that we know of," she said, meaning us. "No telling how many more are out there." Though our standards for victimhood differed wildly, I veered toward the park entrance with a shrug. If nothing else, it was an excuse to extend my day off at what I'd once believed to be the most magical place in New York. And who knew? Maybe I'd get my spin on the Wonder Wheel after all. "Okie doke," I said. "Let's go tackle the case of the missing Mermaid Tails." Chapter 3. Madame Mysteria's booth was painted midnight blue with silver moons and stars, elaborate stenciling promising fortunes told and fates revealed. But the small interior space, backed by a velvet curtain, was vacant. The only person within 50 feet of the booth was a teenaged girl perched atop a park bench. Her thumbs flew as she typed away on a smartphone. I cleared my throat, but Tabitha beat me to it. "Where's the crystal-gazing wench?" she demanded. Heat broke across my face, but the girl was too absorbed in her phone to realize she was being interrogated by a cat. She held up a finger as she finished thumbing her message, then stood and disappeared behind the booth. Moments later, the curtain shook and she reappeared between the folds. She'd swapped her mustard-colored hoodie for a purple shawl and oversized turban festooned with plastic jewels. "Yes," she said, attempting an Eastern European accent that landed somewhere between Transylvania and Jersey Shore. "You're kidding me," I muttered. I turned, half expecting to find Boardwalk Benny watching us with a delighted grin, but he was nowhere in sight. "You're Madame Mysteria?" I asked, to be sure. "It is I," she purred. "First Lady of Fortune, Diviner of Destinies, your express train to the ethereal plane. If there is something you seek—" She stooped and retrieved a crystal ball from an unseen shelf, nearly knocking it over in her haste to place it between us. "Madame Mysteria will tell you all." She implored me with heavily made-up eyes that were supposed to appear otherworldly but only evoked second-hand embarrassment. And yeah, sympathy. She probably didn't get much business. "Mermaid Tails," Tabitha hissed up at me. "All right, I just have a couple questions," I told the young woman as I shook the carrier. "Nothing ethereal, really. More to do at the park?" "Yes, I can do this," she began, circling her fingers over her crystal ball. "For $10. I hesitated. As a poorly paid adjunct professor, my compassion had its limits. "Would you accept 5? Tabitha threw herself against the inside of the carrier with such force that it banged my hip. Grumbling, I fished 2 5s from my wallet and dropped them on the counter. Madame Mysteria swept them from sight, then fluttered her eyelids as though entering into a trance state. It might have been more convincing if she weren't also trying to type on her phone, which she'd placed beneath the counter. "Your first question," she prompted. I sighed, but my money was already gone. "I was told Minnie of Minnie's Mermaid Tails didn't show up today," I said half-heartedly. "Along with some other vendors. Do you know anything about this?" "Oh, yes, yes," she intoned, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "They were warned away." "Warned from what?" "Danger. Grave danger." Her eyes angled toward her phone again. Then, as if suddenly remembering that the crystal ball was supposed to serve a purpose, she blinked and peered into its foggy glass. "Yes, I'm seeing something. Oh!" She forced a shudder. "Something ravenous and deadly." "Well, isn't that conveniently vague?" I muttered. "And these food workers were, what, its targets?" She cocked her head as if listening to voices only she could hear. "The spirits are telling me. Yes." "Who warned them?" She placed a hand dramatically over her heart. "It was I." "You? Then why all the seance theater if you already knew the answer?" Her expression flattened, along with her fake voice. "For more questions, I will need $10 more." I barked a laugh. "Yeah, not happening. I think we have what we came for." "Very good." She steepled her fingers above the crystal ball. "If Madame Mysteria can be of further assistance, you know where to find me." "On your phone?" I muttered. I yanked the carrier from my thigh just as Tabitha's claws shot through the mesh door, but there was no way I was paying this girl another nickel. I left, not even bothering with the pretense of tapping my cane. "Where are you going?" Tabitha demanded. "You heard her," I said once we were out of earshot. "No Mermaid Tails today." "No," Tabitha corrected me. "No Mermaid Tails until the park is safe again, and she summons Minnie back." "Tabitha, she's an actor, and not a very good one. She made all of that up." "If I recall, you thought the same thing about Miss Featherpants." "No," I said, mimicking her. "I thought she was well-meaning, just misguided. We were talking about my friend Kayla, whose intuition I doubted before discovering she had actual augur blood. We'd gone on to collaborate on several cases around the city. Though I hadn't heard from her in a few weeks, it wasn't exactly cause for concern. She was as whimsical as she was intuitively gifted. She would reappear when she had another supernatural case for us to suss out. "You were still wrong about her," Tabitha pressed. At a park bench, I sat and placed the carrier beside me. "So you're Kayla's promoter now?" I chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day." "My point, darling, is that recent history has proved that you know far less than you think." "Let's just say I'm 98% confident in this case. Besides, I can't keep feeding Madame Mysteria money I don't have." As I squinted at the sun, I was swept off into another memory, this one of Nana and me on an identical bench sharing a funnel cake. Strange, I smacked my mouth. I could actually taste the powdered sugar. As Tabitha carped on about my arrogance, I turned inward, shifting to my wizard's senses. Like a solar eclipse, the bright day suddenly dimmed. Patterns of energy bloomed into view, spirited energies, the kind you'd expect at an amusement park, especially one with Coney Island's storied history. I felt my lips curving into a smile at the playful, shimmering patterns, the sound of calliope music. "What are you doing?" Tabitha spat. When I looked over, she became the helium balloon Nana had bought for me that day. Only instead of mylar, this one was orange and cat-shaped. The image made me laugh. Before I knew it, I was succumbing to full-body heaves that filled my wizard's vision with tears and left me breathless. "Wait," I clutched my chest. "I actually can't breathe." My mirth vanished, but the taste of powdered sugar only grew stronger. I threw my torso forward, trying to retch out the sickening taste and draw in precious air at the same time. The calliope music turned mocking. My vision entered an in-between state where I could see the actual park, but its energy was warping into a malicious kind of glee, the kind that strangled and killed. Something slammed into my side, knocking me from the bench. My hard landing on the cement walkway unclenched something in my chest. The powdered sugar taste evaporated, and I drew a gasping breath. Sunlight glinted from a pair of hungry eyes. Tabitha's. With a disgusted noise, she jumped off me. The park spun briefly as I sat up. I looked at the open door of her carrier, then blinked around. "How did you get out?" I panted in my half-daze. "I'm not an actual cat, darling. I know how to operate a release. Now, do you want to explain why you were just behaving like a lunatic having a fit?" In the moment before I'd been knocked to the ground, I'd caught a pattern in my wizard's vision, a shimmering web, but twisted and fractured. Grunting, I recovered my cane and used it to stand. I don't know if Madame Mysteria can tell a crystal ball from a volleyball, but there's bad energy here. Deadly energy. I jabbed my cane at what looked like an abandoned attraction in the middle distance. And it centered on that building. Tabitha grinned smugly as she returned herself to the carrier. "Told you so." Chapter 4. The wooden building, topped with a square cupola, was tucked into a corner of the park and quarantined by a chain-link fence. A sign on the padlocked gate read "Temporarily Closed," but the sign's faded letters, coupled with the building's sun-bleached and peeling state, suggested permanent retirement. "The mirror maze," Tabitha murmured from inside the carrier, reading a painted sign above the boarded-over entrance. I felt for traces of the warped energy I'd experienced from the park bench. Nothing now. Not superficially, anyway, and I wasn't about to open my wizard's senses again. Instead, I studied the aging padlock. Fresh scrapes around the keyhole suggested it had been recently opened. Tabitha sighed as I circled the fence. "You are a magic user. Did it not occur to you to break the lock?" Which could lead to a kid wandering inside? No thanks. But besides my concern for the public's welfare, something was telling me to use discretion. At an inconspicuous spot, I inserted my cane beneath the skirt of the fence. "Protezione," I intoned. As light gleamed from the opal end of my cane, I shaped it into a wedge of hardened air and grew it out. The fence folded upward, producing an opening large enough to shove the carrier underneath. "You're getting sand all over me," Tabitha complained. Peering back to ensure no one was watching, I dropped to my stomach and squirmed through after her. "There," I said, dusting off my shirt and retrieving the carrier. "Insensitive brute," Tabitha muttered, grooming herself compulsively. I stole around to the main entrance and studied the boards. If someone was opening the padlock, it stood to reason that they may also have been accessing the building. I gave the first board a tentative push. "The far right one," Tabitha said grudgingly. I stepped over and pressed on it. To my surprise, it swung on an axis, the top of the board disappeared into darkness while the bottom levered up to create a narrow opening. "How did you know?" I asked. "I'm sensitive to drafts." I wasted no time stooping and edging through the opening and into a musty space. Calling light to my cane, I straightened through a flurry of dust motes. We were in an entrance hall featuring a faded mural of sideshow performers and exotic animals, probably a nod to the park's early history. Ahead were a pair of doorways, ingress and egress. Rows of mirrors gleamed beyond. I lowered my cane, illuminating a span of disintegrating red carpet. A path tracked through the dust. Footprints, but too faint to make out any features. They led toward the ingress corridor. My heart pounded hard enough to rattle my coin pendant as I started forward. A dangerous energy had emanated from this place, one that had nearly strangled me with my own pleasant memories. And it was an energy I'd never encountered before. Should I really have just strolled in like this? As we arrived at the first mirror, I whispered, "Be ready for any—" "Ow!" Tabitha wailed. "Are you trying to burn out my retinas?" Though the large sterling-framed mirrors were cloudy, they reflected the light from my cane in an infinite regression, much of it hitting her carrier. "Sorry," I said, dimming the invocation. "But listen, we need to be on high alert, and silent." "Then stop inflicting me with your petty tortures." As light shrank from the mirrors, our reflections grew in their stead, only they were stretched and squashed and bent at comical angles. Typical funhouse fare, but I found no fun in them at all. They produced a displacing effect. Given the modest size of the building, the maze couldn't have been very extensive, but it would have been disorienting to navigate without the footprints acting as our guide. Farther ahead, they stopped at a mirror. "Darling," Tabitha said, "we have company." I jerked my gaze around. "Where?" "Right there." I looked down to find her eyes fixed on an emaciated version of herself. I started to sigh, she was staring at her own reflection, before realizing it wasn't inside of a carrier. Hell, it wasn't even inside the glass. With a hiss, her reflection stalked forward on insect-like spindles for legs. "Look at that bulimic face," Tabitha scoffed. "Now do you see why I refuse to diet?" Above the pits of the apparition's cheeks, its eyes stirred with sickly green light. I'd seen enough. With a thrust of my cane, I shouted, "Vigore!" The force invocation scattered the apparition and struck the mirror it had emerged from like a fist. The glass snapped and fissured. I peered around, cane at the ready, but the other reflections of us appeared to be staying on their side of the glass. Back at the fractured mirror, I did a double take. The skinny apparition was back, only now as a multitude of smaller versions, one for each shard. "Congratulations," Tabitha said. "You've just fathered a litter." One by one, the apparitions began dropping to the floor. Like a horde of kittens, they scampered toward me with malicious grins. The first one gouged its needle-like claws into the cuff of my pants and began scaling my leg. I danced back. "Hey, get off!" The others followed, swarming up me. I kicked and spun, no idea how to shake them. Despite her carrier swinging around, Tabitha laughed deliriously. "I've dreamt of this day." The first kitten reached my collar and sunk its tiny teeth into my neck. Hollering, I dropped my cane to bat it away, but it was like fighting air. I only succeeded in slapping myself. More kittens joined in, finding fresh skin to embed their fiendish little teeth. I staggered as the others began dragging me sideways. On the floor, the light from my cane dimmed, then went out, and just like that, the biting and tugging stopped. I froze to be sure it was over, then leaned a hand against my knee to breathe. Of course, the mirrors needed light to cast reflections. No light, no miniature tabbies. "Oh, I wish someone had recorded that," my cat said in a way that suggested a feline wiping tears from her eyes. "Yeah, hilarious." I pawed around until I found my cane. "Now I need you to guide us out." Her snorting laughter fell off. "But we've accomplished nothing. Well, besides you impersonating a scratching post." "Tabitha, I'm bleeding." She released an aggrieved sigh. "Fine." As she called the directions, I stumbled and bumped until a thin outline of light appeared around the swinging board. Before long, we were on the other side of the fence again, back in full sun. I pressed a handkerchief to my still smarting neck and studied the pinpoints of blood in the fabric. Though I frowned at Tabitha's snickering, I partly deserved it. I should never have rushed in blind like that. "You mentioned coming to Coney Island in the past," I said. "Do you remember the mirror maze or anything else that might have been in this spot?" Her face screwed up in annoyance. "Darling, that was 100 years ago, maybe more. All I remember were those tasty sailors at the saloons along the beach. Such easy prey. Oh, and that hotel built like a giant elephant. It was right over there. This one time—" "Let's go," I said. "Where?" Tabitha spat, upset at having been interrupted. "We passed a historical society on Surf Avenue earlier. If they're open, they should have what we're looking for." "Mermaid Tails?" she asked, hopefully. "A history lesson." Drown me now." Chapter 5. We passed a couple more shuttered restaurants, but the Coney Island Historical Society was blessedly open. Or its door was, anyway, and I found myself standing in a front room that looked part museum, part someone's home office in need of decluttering. "Hello," I called. From a back room, chair legs scraped. "Silence," I reminded Tabitha in a whisper. "You're trying to order a cat," she replied cynically and way too loud. A moment later, a figure appeared in a doorway. The elderly man was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair that complemented his brown suit. I'd caught him mid-bite, and as he finished chewing, he quickly dabbed his mouth with a cloth napkin and watched me with expectant blue eyes. Yes," he said. I cleared my throat. "Sorry if I've caught you at a bad time. I'm an academic. I teach at Midtown College, and I couldn't enjoy a day at Coney Island without learning a bit about its history." The man's eyes dimmed momentarily, disappointment, before brightening above an earnest smile. "Well, my scholarly compatriot," he said with a sharp clap, "you've come to the right place." Tabitha groaned. "Eugene Marsh," he said, crossing the room in 3 spry steps and offering his hand. "Historical Society President." "Everson Croft," I replied. "Tormentor of my existence," Tabitha added in a low voice that escaped his hearing. As we shook hands, Eugene used his surprisingly powerful grip to pull me over to an untidy desk. "Go ahead and have a seat. Just let me, clear some space off here." As I lowered myself into a creaky chair and set Tabitha's carrier on the far side, Eugene began relocating books from one stack to another, then shuffled some papers around. After roughly a minute of accomplishing nothing, he pinned a large book under his arm and dragged a chair around to my side. "Here we go," he said, taking a seat and using our adjoining armrests to support the tome. "Coney Island, A Photographic History," I read, by Eugene and Margaret Marsh. "Hey, congratulations." "12th edition," he beamed. "We update it as we acquire new tidbits and rare photos. The first is actually one of my favorites." He opened the book to an image of a daguerreotype from 1847 showing sand dunes and a few fishing shacks. "Coney Island's humble beginnings, but by the 1870s, railroads joined the island to the city, and resourceful types saw opportunity everywhere. Just look at the transformation. You had all these bizarre little attractions, complete charlatans, most of them, but the public ate it up." He began flipping the pages so enthusiastically that I only caught glimpses of Coney Island's early shift from fishing backwater to amusement mecca. When something caught my eye, I thrust a hand between the pages, a photo of a towering building in the shape of an elephant, the one Tabitha had mentioned. "Ah, yes," Eugene said with a chortle. "The Elephantine Colossus. 31 hotel rooms inside, if you can believe it. The legs held shops and staircases. The belly had a concert hall, and the elephant's eyes doubled as observation decks with splendid views. Of course, it became rather notorious. Seeing the elephant became slang for visiting the brothel it eventually housed. Built in 1885, it burned down in just as spectacular fashion a decade later." That gave me a window for when Tabitha would have been here. Eugene held up a lengthy finger. "But its destruction did help clear the way for Coney Island's golden age. Steeplechase opened in 1897, then Luna Park in 1903. Look at these nighttime photographs. 1 million electric lights, they claimed. Dreamland was even more ambitious when it opened in 1904. He turned to a 2-page spread showing a skyline of white towers and golden domes that looked more like something from the Arabian Nights than Brooklyn. I couldn't help but smile at the audacity. "But Dreamland, too, burned down, 1911. His eyes actually misted over as he looked across the wondrous spread. "Terrible tragedy. Coney Island recovered somewhat, but by the 50s and 60s, well, it wasn't the magical place to the public that it once was." He turned the pages more slowly. "The attractions that managed to hang on fell into disrepair." "Wow, I can see that," I said, eyeing the first color photos, which looked gloomier somehow than the black and whites. "In the early 70s, Margaret and I took up residence here on Surf Avenue and started the society. Spent years cataloging what was left, interviewed old-timers before their stories could pass along with them. We organized cleanup efforts, lobbied the city for historic preservation, even managed to get some of the surviving rides landmark status, the Cyclone, the Wonder Wheel." "The Wonder Wheel was my first amusement park ride," I blurted out, the old joy returning like a blast of wind through my hair. I was careful not to become consumed by it this time, though. "My grandmother took me," I said, recomposing myself. "It's actually one of my favorite memories." "You see, that couldn't have happened without our work. Tourism picked up again. New investors took interest. Coney Island recaptured the public's imagination. I keep telling Margaret that we midwifed its rebirth." He'd reached a chapter appropriately titled Renaissance, filled with photos of gleaming rides and new attractions. A special section showed Coney Island's famous Mermaid Parade, which attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors. As he turned the glossy pages, he could have been looking at baby photos. "You know, I was wandering around earlier," I said, almost hating to disturb his reverie, "and I happened on what must have been one of the old attractions. The Mirror Maze?" "Yes, that." With a slight squint, he sat back. "Built in 1925, though it went through several owners." He returned to the book, flipping backward now. "Ah, here it is." A black and white aerial shot showed a section of park centered on the Mirror Maze. A long line stretched from the front door. "Popular," I remarked. "Yes, a shame when it closed, but those sorts of attractions fell out of fashion." "I'm surprised it's still here," I said, trying to sound casual as I looked over the rest of the photo. He released a beleaguered grunt. "You're not the only one. It goes back to the ownership issue. Seems every time it's scheduled for demolition, another claimant surfaces with a pile of documents. The plot would be worth a pretty penny now. Meanwhile, the poor building just sits there. I've actually testified a few times as a historical expert, but honestly, at this point, the lawyers are making more money dragging it out than anyone would from actually resolving the ownership." I was considering how to ask whether anything strange had ever occurred there, such as reflections coming to murderous life, when I sensed we were being watched. I looked over to find a stooped woman peering at us from the back of the house, her face narrow and pinched. Eugene spotted her too. "Ah, there's my better half. Come on in, Margaret," he called. "Meet my new friend, Everson. I'm showing him our book." I raised my hand but received only a sharp nod in response, her fierce eyes stating she was in no mood for a meet and greet. They shifted to Eugene. "Can you, excuse me a moment?" he asked. "Sure thing," I replied, taking the book onto my lap. He hurried from the room, he and his wife disappearing into the back of the house. My ear picked up hisses of whispered conversation that sounded pressing. Below me, snores shook Tabitha's carrier. With my thumb bookmarking the page with the mirror maze, I flipped back and forth, comparing it with images from earlier periods. Using the streets as landmarks, I soon found what I was looking for, a building on the same site. I brought my face closer to the page to study the tall Gothic Revival mansion with its narrow windows and dark woodwork. Small signs or placards were arranged around the main entrance, suggesting an attraction of some kind, but they were too blurry to read. The caption dated the photo to 1905. "Cornelius Blackwell's place." I jerked upright. Though Eugene was only now returning through the doorway, he could see exactly what I was looking at. He'd authored the book, after all. But his voice sounded less effusive now, more taut. "Professor Blackwell arrived in Coney Island in 1889, he continued. "A doctor of sciences from Edinburgh, or so he claimed. His place doubled as a museum of oddities, fake specimens, optical illusions, electrical apparatuses that produced otherworldly effects, that sort of thing. Charged $0.25 a ticket." This seemed promising. "What became of him?" Well, records show he operated until 1908. Eugene's voice dropped as he arrived beside me. Then he simply vanished. Not as mysterious as it sounds. He just couldn't compete with the new parks, likely owed money to unscrupulous creditors as well. Others in his position skipped town, too. The city eventually seized the properties for unpaid taxes, and they were swallowed up by Luna Park. I looked at the photo again. A house like that would have had a below-ground cellar. Was there anything else? He asked abruptly. There's, something I must attend to. Taking Tabitha's carrier in hand, I rose beside him. Now that you mention it, I noticed a number of vendors are closed today. He sighed and waved a dismissive hand. Yes, a rumor started last night that some awful thing is supposed to happen. We've had a few folks picked up by ambulances recently. Too much drink and sun, if you ask me. Though more cases than usual, I suppose. Maybe that's given the rumor some traction. Who started it? Oh, the new fortune teller, Madame Mysteria. Isn't she just a teenager? I passed her booth earlier. Perhaps, but she forecast that lightning strike on the comet last week. Now folks are more inclined to listen to her. He lowered his voice. Between us, though, I'm not sure it's all her doing. What do you mean? I've seen her with someone lately, a little skinny fellow. Didn't like the looks of him. He glanced back at the doorway where I could see the very edge of his wife's shadow. I'm sorry, but I really do have to run. Why don't you keep this? He patted the book I was still holding. Signed copy. I'm honored. Thank you. He returned a distracted smile, not seeming to have fully heard me. Next time you're in Coney Island, he said, already escorting me out, be sure to come back and see us. Our door is always open. With a pat on my back, he closed said door behind me and turned several bolts. Tabitha released a loud yawn as I paced away. Well, wasn't he an absolute bore? We may have found what we're looking for, I said. Before the mirror maze, there was a museum of scientific curiosities run by a Professor Blackwell. I'm betting he acquired something enchanted or cursed, something that's still on site. I didn't get the chance to pick Eugene's brain, though. I thought back to his wife's intrusion and his sudden need to get rid of me. Was it a coincidence she'd appeared right when we'd begun talking about the mirror maze? And what about when he'd caught me looking at Blackwell's mansion? Was that concern on his face, or just the aftermath of a scolding from his wife? Did he mention the Mermaid Tails? Tabitha asked. He only said that Madame Mysteria had warned away the vendors. Apparently she's been hanging around with someone new, someone who might be helping her. I remembered the way she'd consulted her phone during my reading, and according to Boardwalk Benny, she'd become gifted only recently. If her new companion was the explanation, he could know what we were up against. Then what are we doing piddling around? Tabitha asked in annoyance. Shouldn't we be talking to her again? Definitely, but I'll need to stop at an ATM first. Chapter 6. With my wallet heavier by 2/20s, we returned to Madame Mysteria's booth only to find it empty again. And this time the young woman was nowhere in sight. I peered around with a frustrated sigh. See what happens when you waste time with historical nonsense? Tabitha complained. Well, Eugene's mention of mysterious friend is the reason we're looking for her again, I shot back. But it was past Tabitha's lunchtime, and she was incapable of reason. Yes, I know all about your education kink, she went on. The only thing more gratifying than watching those mini-me's attacking you earlier would be going to your library one morning to discover your stiff corpse under a fallen bookcase. I'd long since given up on the idea that these outings would bring us closer. Letting her remark pass, I eyed the booth's window, which had been left ajar. I considered sending Tabitha through for a look, but who was I kidding? After setting her carrier down, I slid the window open the rest of the way and hoisted myself up. Craning my neck inside, I made out a shelf where Mysteria had set her phone earlier. I couldn't see anything now, but I reached down a hand to feel inside. Looking for Ada? I jerked back with a grunt, hitting my head against the window frame. Dropping to the ground, I wheeled to find myself face to face with Boardwalk Benny. A smile spread inside his disheveled beard. Startle you? Maybe announce yourself next time? I said irritably, rubbing my head. Tabitha snorted a laugh. Sorry, mate, he said. I'm a bit nearsighted. Was just going to tell you I seen Ada dip down to the boardwalk. Goes to a spot near the restrooms there for her breaks. He mimed, puffing a cigarette. Can't do that in the park." "Thanks," I replied, softening. For the second time, he was being helpful, and for the second time, I'd been a jerk to him. It then occurred to me that as a resident of the boardwalk, he might know something about Ada's friend. "Hey, I'm actually looking for someone she's been hanging around with." "Oh, right, that one." "You know him?" "Never caught the name, but I've seen him. Young looking. Pops in now and again, sometimes takes her for a coffee. Doesn't hang about for very long. Odd sort." Eugene had said something about not liking the looks of him. "How so?" "Never got a good measure of the face on account of these." He waved a finger from one nearsighted eye to the other. "More the way he slinks about. Talks in a mumble, too, like he's up to no good." Drops of adrenaline sped my heart. "When was he last here?" Benny scratched his chin. "Yesterday, I think. The days sort of run together." Was this mysterious person a friend who possessed actual abilities and wanted to help Ada, or was he using her for more sinister purposes? I even wondered if he was somehow connected to Blackwell's old estate and the strange energy. "Hey, what can you tell me about that closed attraction?" I nodded across the park. "The Mirror Maze?" Benny asked without looking. He wouldn't have been able to see it anyway, but his pupils swelled as his voice dropped. "It's nowhere to be poking about, I can tell you that. Word on the wood is that a pair of vagrants broke in on a bad snow day some years back. They never come out again." His story sent a small shiver through me. Murdered by their own reflections? As my gaze returned to the mirror maze, I pictured Professor Blackwell's mansion rising darkly in its stead. Before I could ask Benny anything else, a scream rose on the wind. It twisted into a shrill cry for help, spearing my heart. Benny turned his head casually toward the shore. "Sounds like Ada." Seizing Tabitha's carrier, I took off toward the boardwalk at a cane-pumping run. Behind us, Benny called out the directions. "When you hit the wood, take a right. Restrooms are down there." At the boardwalk, bursts of cold ocean wind were driving the few elderly strollers into the park for cover, while also muffling Ada's screams. Her cries were coming from the far side of the restroom building. With my torso bent to the wind, I climbed over the railing and churned my legs through the soft sand. The screams grew into words in a Jersey accent. "Get away from me!" At the restroom building, I threw myself around the back corner to find Ada crouched against the brick wall. One arm covered her eyes while her other hand swiped at the air. I looked around for her attackers, but the surrounding beach was empty. "Please, somebody help!" she shouted. "Ada," I called, approaching cautiously. "It's okay. You're safe now." As she lowered her arm from her face, a mix of recognition and relief grew in her eyes, but when she looked past me, they popped wide again. "Watch out!" I ducked and pivoted with my cane, but there was no one behind me. "Ada, listen," I said, straightening again. "We're the only ones here." "You don't see them?" Her voice trilled with panic. "See what?" She covered her face again. "The mermaids!" The carrier shifted as Tabitha perked up. "Mermaids?" Was the young woman tripping, or was she experiencing something similar to what I had earlier, a thought or memory turning violent? I was preparing to reassure her again when I noticed that the arm across her eyes was gripping her far shoulder. Blood spread through the shredded fabric of her hoodie jacket and seeped between her fingers, and suddenly the wind carried a thick, fishy scent. I took another look around us and froze. I could see them now. Mermaids, mermen too, dozens of them, sparkling with salt water as if they'd just surged from the ocean. They semi-circled us with manic eyes, bared teeth, and raised spears. "Finally," Tabitha said. "Some lunch." Chapter 7. Dropping Tabitha's carrier, I yanked the sword from my cane. "Am I allowed to enjoy anything with you?" she complained as she landed in the soft sand. "Protezione!" I shouted. A protective shield crackled before us, warping the image of the mer people. But it was only a temporary solution. There were too damned many of them, and what were they doing here to begin with? As I backed in front of Ada, I rifled through my mental notes on mers. They'd inhabited the surrounding bays at one time, moving up the coast to cleaner waters, but they were supposed to be aqua-colored with webbed hands and feet, dark orb-like eyes. These hopped and wriggled forward on giant fishtails, the melanin in their upper bodies and eyes distinctly human. Several of the mermaids were even wearing makeup. It brought to mind the photos from the Marsh's book, the ones about the mermaid parade, I muttered, which made these, apparitions? The lead one, a crowned beauty with dark skin, auburn hair, and a seashell necklace, whirled and thrust her spear. It raked for my protection, spilling sparks in a bright cascade. I hissed as pain seared something deeper. Damn it, this was bad. But apparitions had a major weakness. Jamming a hand into my coat pocket, I seized a handful of salt and threw it into the air. Respingere! I shouted. My shield drew in before releasing its accumulated energy with a spectacular blast, sending the salt through the merpeople's ranks. Salt would disrupt the energy holding them together, making it impossible for the apparitions to cohere, much less run me through with sharp objects. But as I watched the mers expectantly, I didn't catch so much as a shimmer. They remained stubbornly solid. "A little oregano would be nice," Tabitha called. "I'm not seasoning them, for crying out loud," I gasped. "I'm trying to banish them." "Well, at least have the decency to save me a tail. That one on the left looks particularly tasty." The queen mermaid was back with her spear, but Tabitha meant her king. The Jason Momoa-sized specimen laughed deliriously above his massive trident. All the mers were smiling or laughing, evidently having the time of their lives. They cheered as Jason's muscle-stacked arms flexed back. I ducked a moment before his trident sliced the air above my head. Returning a blind swipe, I caught him across his six-pack abs. "Oh, be careful not to ruin the tail," Tabitha called, but my blade passed through him as though he were composed of liquid. The power in my sword hand sputtered until the blade came free again. Fortunately, the strike was enough to send him squelching back on his thick salmon-colored tail. But the queen was there to take his place. I just managed to get my sword up as she thrust her spear a second time. The grating contact sent a deep shiver to my right shoulder. My power spluttered again. The hell? Before I could fend her off, something lifted me up and slammed me into the wall of the restroom building. Jason's trident. He'd hurled it, catching me between two prongs, their points buried deep in the brickwork. I kicked, only to find my feet dangling helplessly above the sand. My sword arm was mashed to my side, prickling from a lack of circulation. And thanks to my contact with the trident, my power was sputtering again. As I fought to squirm loose, Jason pointed at me and released a roaring laugh as though we were all in on the fun. The merpeople cheered louder as their queen moved in, her spear leveled at my chest. "Hold on, darling," Tabitha called to me. "I'm coming." "Please hurry," I gasped as the queen's bright eyes narrowed. But when Tabitha arrived, it wasn't to use her succubus powers to repel my executioner. She was licking Jason's tail. "Oh, come on!" I cried. "God, that's good," she moaned. The queen glanced over at her distractedly. That bought me time to gather my guttering power, the inhibiting effect of the trident feeling an awful lot like fey magic. I looked down at my necklace. The coin pendant, which had jostled free from my collar, contained iron. Not cold iron, but maybe still enough to disrupt the fey energy. I shoved my gathered power into the coin. As the queen drove her spear forward, I shouted, "Disfare!" Blue-white light flashed from the pendant. Tabitha, who was ready to take her first bite of Jason's tail, bit down. Her sharp teeth scraped together, eyes popping wide. She stared around the beach in alarm. "What did you just do?" she demanded. I almost couldn't believe it. The merpeople were gone. Giving my pendant a grateful pat, I slumped down the wall and sat hard in the sand. Slitting her eyes at me, Tabitha returned to the carrier in a petulant stalk and slammed the door closed behind her. "Are you okay?" I asked Ada over a shoulder. "She'll be fine, man," a mumbling voice replied. "This is just skin deep." I craned around to find a peculiar-looking man kneeling beside her. He was thin, with a head of frizzy brown hair. Black wayfarers framed the top of an aquiline nose, while a threadbare mustache hugged his upper lip. He'd pulled a folded cloth from his knapsack and was using it to dab Ada's wound. Something about her receptivity to his care told me this was the mysterious friend. He glanced up at me as he finished his work. "I cruised by your apartment this morning looking for you. Should have sensed where you'd be." I squinted. "I'm sorry, and you are?" "Oh." He removed his glasses and peeled away the mustache. I shook my head, more confused than ever. Then something kicked in my brain, and suddenly I was staring at my friend. "Kayla?" Chapter 8. Her head waggled in acknowledgement. "Hey, Everson." I could only stare as I used the wall to gain my feet. "Yeah, I've been really attuned to Bob Dylan lately," she explained. "Decided to go with it, you know?" Though she'd shed half the disguise as well as the mumbling voice, it was still hard to see her as my friend. I'd called her a chameleon in the past, assuming identities as they suited her shifting moods, and she'd nailed this one. But impersonations aside, her presence was even more perplexing than the merpeople's. What are you doing here?" I stammered. She instructed Ada to press the cloth to her shoulder and stood to face me. She was wearing black skinny jeans and scuffed ankle boots. Though the wind had died down, she clutched the throat of her leather jacket against the stubborn chill. About 2 weeks ago, my augury started whispering to me about Coney Island," she said. "Vague impressions of pain and isolation, but insistent, even more so in my dreams. So I started taking visits out here, guided wanderings, but all I felt were memories, not mine, others, layers of them. Most were bright and colorful, but at times they felt a little too intense. A few bordered on bad trips." I'd already begun nodding. "Earlier today, I had a memory of eating a funnel cake with my grandmother," I said. "Next thing I knew, I was strangling on powdered sugar and my own laughter." Yeah, Ada blurted out. "I was down here on my smoke break, and I got to remember in the Mermaid Parade. My parents took me when I was 10. The whole thing blew me away, so I was thinking about that when suddenly I was surrounded by real mermaids. They were celebrating, like in the parade, only these were all over the place. I'm not even sure they meant to cut me. They were just so..." She searched for the word as she eyed the torn fabric around the bloody cloth. "Hyper," I supplied. "I was going to say spazoid, but yeah." Kayla nodded grimly. "That's what I've been sensing, and that's where they're all going, into greater expressions of violence. My augury hasn't guided me to a source yet, much less a reason behind it, but it led me to Ada. I found her trying to divine the future with nothing but her intent. She reminded me of myself before I understood what I actually had, you know? Wanting so badly to see beyond the veil." "You forecast the lightning strike on the comet," I said. "And it was barely even drizzling," Ada put in excitedly. "She saved, like, a bunch of lives." "We saved," Kayla corrected her. "People around here don't know me from Dylan's bass player, but you convinced the operator to shut it down early." "Yeah, only 'cause he's been crushing on me since July," Ada said with a shrug. "Hold on a moment," Tabitha interrupted, glaring at Kayla. "That would mean you were the one who warned the vendors away." Ada blinked. "Your cat can talk?" Catching my panicked look, Kayla said, "Ada's cool, but yeah, the notion came to me late yesterday. A being so completely consumed by its greed and gluttony that it would kill to get what it wanted." Her shoulders twitched into a shudder. "Its presence overshadowed everything. I had poor Ada here working her phone overtime last night, warning away the employees of Minnie's, Neptune's Bounty." As understanding took hold, I snorted a laugh. Kayla stopped listing seafood restaurants. "What?" "We came to Coney Island today for lunch," I said. "You were sensing Tabitha." As Kayla's eyes shifted to the carrier, one side of her mouth quirked up. "I'll be damned. You're right." Beyond the mesh door, Tabitha's eyes flared a savage green. I blurted out a locking invocation an instant before her claws seized the door's release. Thwarted from murdering my friend, she thrashed inside the carrier with enough force to bulge out the sides, spitting her entire dictionary of expletives. Ada stared. "Whoa, we were so right to warn those vendors?" "All right, let's not rub salt in the wound," I said. Though Tabitha quickly ran out of steam, her carrier continued to hiss and rattle as I picked it up. "She's already been denied a couple Mermaid Tails today. How about we get something in her belly and compare notes? I think I know what's happening in the park." "Here we are," I said, setting a loaded tray of Nathan's fare on a picnic table outside the landmark restaurant. Ada, who'd confessed to being an emotional eater, wasted no time claiming her jumbo chili cheese dog. I scooted a basket of loaded fries in front of Kayla, then took several plain dogs from their buns and bent down. Tabitha's carrier had gone still around its exhausted occupant, which was a blessing. I inserted the ends of the hot dogs through the opening at the bottom of the mesh door and cleaned my fingers with a napkin. "I'm pretty sure I know what we're dealing with," I said. Kayla's head of Dylan-esque curls nodded at me to continue. I was never going to get used to that look. "When I had my funnel cake episode, I perceived an energy," I began. "It was web-like, coming from a shuttered attraction called the Mirror Maze. When I tried to go inside, the reflections attacked, driving me back out." Ada's eyes widened above her hot dog. Before leaving the beach, I'd swaddled her shoulder in healing magic. Throw in Tabitha's capacity for speech and now attacking mirrors, and she was getting one hell of an education. At the turn of the last century, another attraction stood on that same site, I continued. Professor Blackwell's Museum of Scientific Oddities. The president of Coney Island's Historical Society thinks Blackwell was just another charlatan, but the energy around the mermaids from Ada's memory had fey qualities. I'm betting that Blackwell acquired an enchanted object, something to really wow his patrons, but when he fled his creditors, he left it behind with all his specimens and contraptions, probably in a cellar lab. Luna Park must have raised the house and built right on top of it. My phobia of going underground reared like a spooked horse, but the theory explained everything. Memories taking manic life, the reflections in the funhouse mirrors becoming animated, what Kayla had been sensing, but she only watched me above her wayfarers as she finished another fry. Problem? I asked. This energy, her eyelids fluttered, it's coming from something living. What you're feeling is pretty standard with Fey magic, I said. It's not like the magic I practice. The Fey don't just imbue enchanted objects with power. They weave bits of their realm into them. And fairy is unique to say the least. That otherworldly life force is probably what you're sensing. She still didn't appear convinced. But why now? Well, Fey magic has been known to lie dormant, millennia in some cases. A disturbance or change in the environment can awaken it, and someone was recently in the mirror maze. I told her about the scratched padlock and the footprints. Or it could have been that lightning strike you forecast. Some of it may have propagated through the ground, and lightning carries a crapload of raw energy. 1.21 gigawatts, Ada supplied. I nodded approvingly at the Doc Brown reference, but Kayla only issued a slight head waggle. Perhaps, she said. And now that we have an idea what it is, I forged on, it's just a matter of neutralizing it and storing it somewhere safe until I can deliver it to my order. I dug through my satchel to ensure I had the needed implements for the first and second tasks. That should avert the mass violence scenario. Well, it needs to be soon, Kayla said. I sense we're nearing a point of no return. Right. Let's just give Tabitha a chance to... I leaned over until I could see her carrier. Never mind. We can go whenever you're ready. All 6 hot dogs I'd inserted under her door were gone. Chapter 9. I waved Kayla under the chain-link fence behind the mirror maze and passed her the carrier. Ada had returned to the fortune-telling booth to finish her shift. For Tabitha's part, her burst of activity, followed by the high-calorie meal, had sedated her. She'd even been trying to come off as reasonable. I still don't see why we can't summon the food vendors back now that Miss Featherpants knows she screwed up, she said. I'll be a perfect lady. No doubt, I said dryly. But that's beside the point. Until we finish this job, there's a much bigger danger building. Then we can talk about your mermaid tail. Well, if you think I'm going to guide you with my feline sight this time, she spat, you're stupider than you look. Your services won't be needed, I said, adding a silent thank God. Levering up the board at the front entrance, I edged through and called power to my coin pendant. It glowed an ethereal blue, illuminating the entranceway while also keeping any fey energy at bay. Kayla followed, slipping her sunglasses into the pocket of her flannel shirt as she paused to study the old mural of sideshow performers. She shook her head, sadly. Imagine how painful that must have been, trying to uphold your dignity, your sense of self-worth, when everyone treats you like a spectacle for their own amusement. Tabitha snorted. Welcome to my world. Okay, listen, I whispered. Even with my pendant, we need to exercise extreme caution. I know this is a little like saying try not to picture a pink elephant, but if any joyful memories of Coney Island surface, think of something else. In fact, picturing a pink elephant might be as good a strategy as joyful memories, Tabitha erupted. Today's outing has been one giant cluster. Okay, great, I said, cutting her off. Then you'll have no problem. I took lead, following the footprints through the dust again. At the mirrors, I expanded my pendant's light, ready to kill it the moment one of our reflections turned feisty. But they were all behaving themselves. Are these two supposed to be in here? Kayla whispered. I turned to find her regarding a pair of mirrors. They held reflections, but not ours. The 2 figures wore grimy clothing, one man seemingly floating in an oversized army surplus jacket, the other clutching a stained sleeping bag like a security blanket. Recognition hit me like a bolt as I recalled Benny's story. 2 vagrants broke in here on a bad snow day, I whispered. They were never seen again. I had no idea how they'd become trapped in the mirrors, but then I remembered how the kittens had tugged on me during their attack. Had they been trying to drag me inside another mirror? My legs jittered reflexively as if to shake them off again. What can we do for these poor souls? Kayla asked. How about joining them? Tabitha suggested. I eased my cane between Kayla and the men in the mirrors. First, let's back away from the glass. That's fey magic holding them inside. Neutralizing the source should release them, I added, less than confidently. I regarded the men's sleepy eyes and dreamy smiles. At least they didn't appear to be suffering. Hold on a little longer, friends, Kayla told them. You'll soon be free. I turned from the men and studied the floor. The print's end just ahead. As I stopped before a wide mirror, I fully expected to see the owner of the footprints suspended in the glass, too. But it was just me. Or rather, my squashed reflection bobbing up and down. The mirror wasn't aligned with the others, though. It was a couple inches lower, its frame resting on the floor. I set down the carrier, gripped the mirror's sides, and lifted. It wasn't as heavy as I'd been expecting and came easily from the wall. Kayla gasped. There's a space back there. I set the mirror aside and faced the opening. Sure enough, my pendant illuminated a large hole punched through the yellowing plaster. It opened into a space beyond the mirror maze's interior wall, exposing old wooden subflooring. My eyes immediately locked onto a crowbar and small excavation. Someone's been busy, I murmured, crouching to see better. My light illuminated a section of pried-up floorboards near the back, the planks piled haphazardly. I stooped through the opening and approached the hole slowly. My chest was already clenching, anticipating our descent into the cellar. I was strangely relieved to find a wooden covering instead, likely installed when the mirror maze was built over the mansion's foundation more than a century earlier. Huh, the intruder only made it this far, I said as Kayla arrived beside me with Tabitha's carrier. They didn't break through for some reason. I pulled my cane apart and wedged the tip of my blade into a crack in the wood covering. Everyone back, I whispered, focusing power into my mental prism until I could feel the familiar hum. Vigore, I commanded. The force invocation shot down my blade like lightning and struck the brittle wood with a muffled crack. The covering imploded, its shards tumbling into the darkness below. Tabitha swore. Some of us have delicate ears, you know. As the dust settled, my pendant's light radiated through the opening, revealing stone steps that dropped precipitously. The moment I'd been anticipating and dreading was here. Shall we? I wheezed. Gathering my will, I thrust a foot onto the first step. I forced a breath in and out, then willed myself down another step. Damp air wafted past me, reeking of mothballs and formaldehyde. Kayla's hand found my shoulder. The contact eased my phobia, and I soon arrived on a hard-packed dirt floor. Professor Blackwell's laboratory, I announced in a whisper. My pendant's light was already swelling over an oak desk, its surface of scattered papers and penwells covered in a damp layer of dust. On nearby shelves, jars filled with murky liquids loomed in and out of view. One held a tangle of brown seaweed, with eyeballs. As I'd guessed, this was where he'd stored his oddities, but I kept my wizard's senses tightly shuttered. After what had happened on the park bench, I wasn't eager to expose myself to the unpredictable energy up close and personal. I peered over at Kayla, who'd crept toward a workbench littered with dust-webbed vials and brass instruments. Sense anything? I asked. We're below the memories down here. She paused, her free hand fluttering through the air. I can feel the pain and isolation again, the emotions that first called me. But they're thick here, Everson. Their threads knot around each other in a tapestry of despair, the darkest, most tangled kind. As I joined her, I found tears standing in her eyes. Tabitha groaned. Wake me up when something interesting happens. What you're feeling isn't uncommon with fey magic, I assured Kayla, especially when it's been cut off from its realm for a long time. Just remember we're looking for something enchanted. Could be anything, a music box, a magic lantern. It could even be something as mundane as a pen. The idea of a pen got me thinking. Any professor worth his salt would have kept notes on his procurements. If he'd acquired something truly enchanted, he would have documented the hell out of it. I rubbed Kayla's back. I'll go check out his desk. You keep looking over here. With a nod, she wiped her eyes and stretched her hand out toward the other instruments. At the desk, I worked the moisture-swollen top drawer back and forth until it opened. Empty. The same was true of the others. Had Professor Blackwell cleaned them out, or had somebody else? It would have to have been before the mirror maze was constructed, given the intact cover beneath the subflooring. "Everson!" Kayla called urgently. I rushed back to find her standing in front of a large electrical apparatus with coiled wires and blackened copper fittings, but she was pointing to the tarp-covered lump beside it. Only the tarp didn't match the rest of the cellar. The blue material was shiny and modern-looking. How was that possible? "It's under there," she whispered. "What we're searching for," I whispered back. When she nodded, I slotted my sword back into my staff and drew the bag of gray salt from my satchel. Kayla lifted the corner of the tarp. "Are you ready?" I nodded, even though my heart was drumming in my ears. Was I? Slowly, she drew the tarp toward her. Chapter 10. The tarp slid away, revealing a metal contraption about 4 feet tall. Though shaped like a silo, it defied easy description. I leaned closer to study what appeared to be a simple latticework of tarnished silver, but the pattern grew more intricate the longer I stared. The mesmerizing designs spiraled upward to a dome topped with a shimmering sphere. "It's beautiful," Kayla whispered. I managed the barest nod, not wanting to break my gaze from whatever this was, but when I realized what it was doing to me, I yanked my eyes away. "And Fay Maid," I warned, blocking Kayla's view with my hand. An entranced look had already begun growing in her eyes. She seized my forearm as if to shove it aside, but her grip softened mid-motion. "Whoa," she said, blinking hard. "So that's what real fairy magic feels like?" "Yeah, sorry, should have warned you. The first look at something Fay made can be overwhelming. Won't hit quite as hard the next time, especially with my pendant's energy acting as a buffer. Just try not to stare." I lowered my hand slowly, watching her eyes to make sure they didn't glaze over again. She glanced at it and looked quickly away. "What does it do?" "That's the million-dollar question." I studied the strange geometry. "Mind waiting here while I take a closer look?" "Be careful." Clutching my salt bag, I circled the contraption. The main elements were unmistakably Fey, but I soon encountered mundane additions: copper conductors and glass insulators, work that likely dated to Professor Blackwell's time. More recent components hugged and threaded the latticework. Though neatly done, the additions were like garbage piled around the Sistine Chapel. Why ruin perfection? I traced some filaments up to the shimmering sphere. It hummed suddenly, releasing a burst of energy. The taste of powdered sugar hit my throat, but the energy hadn't met me full on. Most of it radiated upward, through the ceiling and into the park. By the time I caught my breath, I understood. "It's an amplifier." "An amplifier?" Kayla repeated. "As in strengthening a signal?" "Fey magic in this case, but yeah, it's amplifying joyful memories. That's what we've been experiencing, only they're distorted. The amplifier could have been faulty when Blackwell acquired it. He appears to have jury-rigged it to get it working. But we're talking about components from the Edison era. Looks like they've been enhanced since, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're failing now." Once again, I wondered who'd been coming down here, and how. "Hold on," Kayla said in that faraway voice that meant she was tuning into her augury. "Yes, I can feel it now. Blackwell was using the magic on his patrons. It magnified the joy and wonder they felt visiting his museum, viewing his strange attractions. They couldn't stop thinking about them." "Resulting in repeat business," I said. "But I wonder if the signal was stronger than he intended. Maybe he didn't just charm his patrons, maybe he charmed all of Coney Island." I thought of the Marshes book. Had Blackwell inadvertently spurred visionaries into grander and grander ideas of what this place could become? Steeplechase, Luna Park with its million electric lights, Dreamland. Had he sown the seeds of his own demise? That was usually how dabbling in Fey magic ended. "But I can't get over how alive it feels," Kayla said. When the sphere hummed again, I crouched and called for her to get low. This time, the powdered sugar tasted fainter. "Is there a way to turn it off?" she asked. "Not exactly, but I might be able to dilute its power." I hefted my salt bag, gauging its weight. The contraption was conducting energy to the shimmering sphere. The power source would be located inside the main body, a crystal, perhaps, or an enchanted stone, something my modest salt supply could cover, I hoped. I grew my light out, searching for a door or opening. Instead, I found a symbol along the base, so fine it was nearly imperceptible. A release glyph. As soon as I spoke the word, an unseen door would open and it would be case closed. We'd get Tabitha her mermaid tail and I'd take a spin on the wonder wheel. Congratulating myself for having just completed a self-guided study on fey glyphs, I warmed up my tongue and brought my salt bag into position. But I'd barely begun rehearsing the sound when I stopped. "Crap," I whispered. "What's wrong?" Kayla asked. Her earlier remark about feeling an aliveness returned like a punch to the head. As I looked over the amplifier again, the latticework took on a darker meaning. Beautiful, yes, but built to contain. "I found a release symbol," I said, "but this one isn't for a door. It's for a prisoner." Kayla crawled around to join me. Before I could caution her, she thrust her face forward, squinting through the gaps in the latticework. She reared back with her hands pressed to her chest, eyes huge. "What?" I asked, taking my own look. "There's a child in there," she gasped. "No way." But as my vision adjusted, I saw it too. Curled in the center of the cage, a small being no larger than a toddler. Dull moonlight hair fell across a cherubic face, while tiny threads of silver light webbed its lavender skin. Gossamer wings, so fine they were barely visible, wrapped the being's body. They fluttered with each rapid breath, while its eyes darted behind delicate lids, lost in dreams, or weaving them. "Holy hell," I breathed. Urgent questions filled Kayla's stare. "That's a freaking dreamweaver," I hissed. She inhaled, absorbing the information, then nodded slowly. "It's beginning to awaken, and it despairs in its isolation. This is what I've been feeling ever since. This is why I was called to Coney Island." Her voice deepened as her eyelids fluttered. "It was kidnapped long ago, imprisoned for a lord's entertainment." She probably meant a fey lord, and I could see it now. The Dreamweaver's cage placed in one of its lavish courts, partly as a showpiece, partly to amplify the lord's own magical entertainments. "It was discarded," Kayla continued, "then found and sold like a second-hand trinket." Her hands moved to caress the latticework as if she could comfort the being inside. "We have to return it to its home." "It's, not that easy," I said, drawing her gently back. "Dreamweavers are big-time powerful, way above my pay grade. They don't just create dreams, they can manipulate memories, blur the line between what's real and what's imagined, and when they're stressed—" I paused, recalling a story of one reducing an entire elvish legion to drooling fools. "They're dangerous." "It doesn't belong here," Kayla said firmly. "No, it doesn't," I agreed, studying the container. "But we need to be smart about this." The Dreamweaver was the power source, which created a whole host of problems. Springing the release glyph would likely wake it up, and not to the tune of zippity-doo-dah. My bag of salt wouldn't accomplish anything except stress it further, and I wasn't ready to start wearing a bib. "Here, I'll contact my order," I said, already digging inside my satchel for the silver cup and oil crystal I would need to message them. "The senior members are leagues beyond me. They'll know what to do." If one even bothered showing up, but I didn't mention that part. Kayla gripped my arm. "Someone's coming," she whispered. I seized my pendant to cover the light and peered out. Sure enough, a flashlight beam was cutting through the darkness at the bottom of the steps. I drew back. We listened as footsteps scuffed across the packed dirt floor. The beam swept past us, then stopped, illuminating Tabitha's carrier. Damn it. We'd left it on the other side of the container. The beam brightened as the footsteps approached. I held my breath. When a figure entered my view, I recognized the stooped silhouette. This was Margaret Marsh from the Historical Society. And was that a knife in her hand? When she nudged the carrier with her foot, I compressed my lips, praying Tabitha had fallen into one of her comatose-grade slumbers. Margaret squatted for a closer look. I angled my cane up to cast, but the opal in the wood's end caught a glint of her light. The flashlight's beam whipped toward me and hit me full in the face. I squinted against the glare as Margaret raised her shaking weapon. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. Chapter 11. Oh, well, I cleared my throat. How to even begin to explain what we were doing in Blackwell's cellar.
You were the one in our office earlier, Margaret snapped. And who's this?
When her beam cut over to Kayla, I raised my cane. Better to blast first and ask questions later. But before I could utter a word of power, something hairy flew into my mouth. I spluttered and spat it out. An adhesive mustache landed between my knees.
Sorry, Kayla whispered, but she has something to tell us.
In case you haven't noticed, I hissed, she also has a knife.
Just wait. Come out from behind there,
Margaret ordered. I complied, keeping Kayla behind me. Margaret's flashlight shifted over to the amplifier/cage. Was this her little secret? A child being she'd been guarding all these years? It would explain why she'd abruptly ended her husband's meeting with me when the mirror maze came up, but I emerged to find her staring at the contraption with the same enchanted glaze that had overtaken Kayla earlier. Taking a chance, I reached for her lowered knife. A bread knife, it turned out. She didn't so much as blink as I worked it from her loosening grip.
What is it?
She breathed. Okay, so maybe not the one who'd been coming down here? As I slipped the knife into my satchel, Kayla took Margaret gently by the arm.
We just found it, she said. You should see for yourself.
Guiding Margaret forward, Kayla had her peer through the latticework. Trusting my friend's intuition, I expanded my pendant's light. A moment later, Margaret's back hitched.
No, please, no.
Kayla wrapped her in her arms and the old woman collapsed against her.
No, 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 no,
Margaret continued, the word becoming a wail. Kayla rocked her gently.
It's okay. You didn't know the child was here.
Tabitha stirred in her carrier, eyes opening to take in the scene.
Oh, God, she groaned and closed them again. My husband knew, Margaret sobbed. Eugene knew. That's why you were trying to find a way into the cellar? Kayla asked, her gaze touching mine. You suspected him of something?
Like me, Kayla had made a connection between Margaret and the incomplete excavation upstairs. As the elderly woman dried her eyes on her sleeve, she nodded. I brought a stool over, cleaning off the dust with the hem of my coat. As Kayla helped her to sit, my pulse quickened. We were finally going to get some answers, but Eugene, he was definitely crazy for Coney Island's history, but crazy enough to imprison a rare being of the Fey realm? Margaret glanced at the cage, then released a long, shaky breath.
The first whiff of fishiness happened a few years after we arrived in Coney Island, she began. The amusement park was failing, and Eugene and I took it upon ourselves to start preserving its history. We found the work fulfilling, a good way to meet the locals, too. We'd come from Ohio, you see.
Starting in a new place can be hard, Kayla agreed, kneeling beside her.
One spring, I had to return to my hometown to care for my mother. When I came back, Eugene was different, manic. He'd become a compulsive cleaner, for one, took over the laundry and everything. He said he believed there was a way to revive Coney Island. I asked what he was talking about. We'd never discussed anything like that. But he just went on and on about a renaissance, telling me to trust in our historical work.
She kept her gaze fixed on her downward-pointed flashlight.
As the summer began, sure enough, folks started returning. At first, we were seeing the ones we'd been taking oral histories from, the old-timers. But then they started bringing their children and grandchildren, all their friends, and it just exploded from there. Inside of a decade, the park was full of rides and attractions again. You couldn't take a step without kicking someone in the heel. But the mirror maze stayed fenced off. Didn't make an ounce of sense.
Eugene mentioned court cases, I said. People making ownership claims. She compressed her lips.
He told me the same thing. But after 10, 20 years of that, you start getting a little suspicious. So I checked the court records. There were cases, all right. Only Eugene was filing all of them.
I stiffened. What?
That's right. He was suing to prevent the mirror maze from being developed, claiming it was historically significant.
Kayla and I exchanged looks. Protecting the cellar?
When I confronted him about it, he said he knew the cases would drag on for years and he didn't want to get me involved. But I wasn't born yesterday. If he wasn't going to tell me the truth, I was going to find out for myself.
You heeded your intuition, Kayla said.
Margaret nodded. I went to the mirror maze first, but I didn't see anything outside the ordinary. I then searched his closets. In one of his hat boxes, I found a stack of old books belonging to Cornelius Blackwell. They were full of notes and drawings, experiments in galvanism and electricity and such, but in one leather-bound book, Blackwell wrote only of the supernatural. There was an entire section devoted to a child he'd supposedly acquired from a cellar. He described the child in great detail and included colored drawings of its purple skin and angelic wings. He recorded the miracles it performed. She glanced at the cage, then looked quickly away. He called it his little marvel. Kayla shook her head, still disturbed by the being's imprisonment, but Margaret's account prompted me to peer through the latticework again. Faint motes of light hovered around the Dreamweaver's slumbering form. They drifted upward, gaining speed as they were pulled into the amplifier. Of course, I didn't believe any of it, not at that time, Margaret continued, but I asked Eugene where he'd found the notebooks and why he'd kept them from me. He claimed some relative of Blackwell's had donated them, but they were too fanciful to include in our records. He said he hid them so as not to contaminate the archives, but then forgot about them. It seemed he was being truthful, and Blackwell did sound crazy, but I knew his old museum had once stood here, and for the first time I really started to suspect Eugene of hiding a dark secret. The Dreamweaver trembled in its sleep, momentarily upsetting the motes of light. You have to understand, Margaret continued. Eugene is as honest as they come, and we were busier than ever with the Historical Society, the book. I wanted to believe him. I was so proud of what we'd accomplished. She paused, considering the cage again. What I thought we'd accomplished. What changed? I asked, drawing back from the latticework. He turned manic again, Margaret replied, about 2 weeks ago. But this time, it was a bad kind of manic. He was eating poorly, sleeping poorly, having nightmares. I thought it may have had to do with the park. The crowds have been down lately. But then I started putting it all together. Blackwell's notes about the Little Marvel, Coney Island's revival, the Mirror Maze lawsuits. She was even sharper than I'd originally guessed. I consulted a trusted friend, she said. A contractor who's worked on other renovations in the park. I had him look at the photos of Blackwell's mansion and estimate the location of the cellar's opening. And when you found it, I said, you started prying up the flooring. But something stopped you. I heard someone coming, she confirmed. When I stepped from behind the mirror, I found myself face to face with my own reflection. Only it was a younger me, from when we first moved here. And it wasn't inside any mirror. I ran home and told Eugene, but he just kept saying, yes, things are a little unsettled right now, but they'll be back to normal soon. And he's been more nervous than ever, jumping every time there's a knock at the door like he's expecting someone. I remembered the flicker of disappointment on Eugene's face when I'd introduced myself that morning. I should have asked him right then if Blackwell's notes about his little marvel were true, if he'd been keeping it down here, but I was so afraid he'd say yes. And ever since seeing my reflection, I've been having memories of those early years, how in love we were with the work, with one another. I didn't want to spoil that. The blue light emanating from my pendant colored the hollows around her eyes. But when I heard him repeating the lie to Everson about the mirror maze and the court cases, something inside me snapped. I told him that he either tell me what was really going on or I was leaving him, and I meant it. What did he say? Kayla asked. He asked me to give him one more day and then he'd tell me everything. I was prepared to wait, but when I saw you two sneaking in here... Realizing we'd yet to explain our presence, her eyes pinched suspiciously. Everson and I do special work, Kayla explained. The energy in the park was unsettled. Assuming Margaret wasn't fluent in energy speak, I added, You know, the crowds being down, the increase in medical emergencies. That's right, Kayla said, and our investigation led us here. Seeming to accept this, Margaret turned to the cage. I was preparing to warn her, but instead of becoming spellbound, her eyes deepened with hurt and sorrow. This is it, isn't it? What Eugene has been hiding from me.
When Kayla looked up, I nodded. This poor woman had been lied to enough.
Yes, Kayla confirmed. It's called a Dreamweaver, and its enclosure also acts as an amplifier. Blackwell used it to increase business at his attraction, but its magical influence spread throughout the entire park.
That helped spark the Golden Age, I continued. Sometime after Blackwell fled, something must have gone faulty with the amplifier, explaining the park's decline. When your husband discovered the cellar, he would have found Blackwell's notebooks down here too. I thought about the cleaned-out desk drawers. He would have learned exactly what the Dreamweaver could do and how the amplifier worked. Blackwell probably detailed his original repairs, giving Eugene a guide to fix it again.
He's always been mechanically inclined,
Margaret said quietly. It explains his confidence about Coney Island's revival when you returned from caring for your mother, I said, also recalling Eugene's comment about midwifing the Renaissance. He'd meant that very literally. But then something else must have broken down, I added. Some component that's kept the Dreamweaver in a deep sleep all these years.
Or maybe it's outgrowing its confinement,
Kayla suggested. I nodded. Either way, it's waking up. As it does, its magic is distorting the memories around the park, turning them aggressive and dangerous.
I just can't believe Eugene would,
Margaret's voice caught.
That he'd keep something so small and vulnerable locked up like this. It's not like him at all.
Her face crumpled again.
Because if it is...
She didn't need to finish. Her marriage and entire life's work would have been built on a lie.
There may be another explanation out there,
Kayla said, rubbing her back. I couldn't tell whether she actually believed it or if she was just trying to comfort Margaret.
But we're working on freeing the Dreamweaver. Everson has some experienced friends, and he was about to contact them.
Right, I said, retrieving my silver cup. Let me get word to them now. I was balancing my notebook on my knee, preparing to pen an urgent message to the order when a tremor ran through the floor. I looked up sharply. Did you feel that? Before anyone could answer, the entire cellar shuddered. My cup toppled over, spilling its oil crystal. Jars tumbled and shattered from Blackwell's shelves, their contents splashing across the floor in a grotesque cascade. Through the lattice work, I caught movement. We need to go, I told Kayla. When she hesitated, I mouthed, now. As she assisted Margaret toward the stairs, I frantically shoved my casting implements back into my satchel. The Dreamweaver's container hummed ominously. As debris rained from the ceiling, distant screams sounded from the park. Behind the mesh door, Tabitha's eyes blinked slowly, the growing chaos not impressing her in the slightest.
Has any progress been made toward my Mermaid Tails? She asked.
Please, I gasped, stumbling toward the stairs. Not now! Chapter 12. The ground continued to shake as we squeezed through the front entrance and hurried out the open gate. The park was in tumult, visitors running in all directions. Some swatted frantically at the air, others glanced over their shoulders, faces stricken with terror. I caught glimpses of land sharks, crazed clowns, and a human-sized hot dog. These people were reacting to their own memories of Coney Island gone wild. I sent a blast from my pendant to disrupt the manifestations, but what was causing the tremors? I nearly collided with Kayla and Margaret, who'd stopped suddenly. I followed their upward stairs and found my answer. An elephant-shaped building, a solid 7 stories tall, loomed over the park. Giant eyes blazed above its thrashing trunk and 40-foot tusks. A massive carriage swayed precariously on its back. And the thing was jumping. Each landing sending fresh shockwaves through the park, rattling its buildings and rides.
That's the elephantine colossus, Margaret stammered.
I recognized the old hotel from the book. I hadn't realized it was pink, though.
Oops,
Tabitha said. Oops, what? I asked vacantly, knowing I needed to do something besides gawk at the animated building. But as my cat's remark registered, my gaze snapped to the carrier. This is your doing?
Well, that old woman wouldn't shut up down there. Can you blame my mind for wandering? I had so many delicious experiences in the Elephant Hotel. Some say it degenerated into a brothel, but I rather saw it as a buffet. She licked her chops. I didn't believe it could be thought into actual existence. You do tend toward the dramatic, darling.
Great, now unthink it, I shouted as the elephant's next pirouette took out a row of game booths and an explosion of stuffed animals.
As if I haven't already tried. I even did what you suggested. I made the elephant pink.
That's not what I meant.
Well, it just proves my earlier point. You don't always know what you're talking about.
Fine, I don't. Happy? Please, I'm begging you. Put all thoughts of the hotel and pink elephants out of your mind.
Oh, darling, that's like trying to work a strand of gristle from your back teeth.
Tabitha! I shouted.
Fine.
I watched as the elephant paused in its mad dance. Without Tabitha's thoughts supporting it, would the apparition collapse, evaporate back into the ether? But it wheeled toward us, its story-high eyes narrowing with anger. Then, with an unearthly shriek from its raised trunk, it launched into a charge.
Drat, didn't work, Tabitha said apathetically.
This way, Kayla called, her arm still linked with Margaret's. She led us to the far side of the mirror maze, putting the building between us and the stampeding hotel. Tabitha grunted as I dropped her carrier onto the grass and yanked my cane apart. Working quickly, I shaped a large shield with my staff and infused the crackling barrier with my pendant's power. Just in time. The elephant arrived, prancing with surprising grace around the mirror maze. Its tusks dipped as it bore down on us. Margaret screamed. The impact against my shield launched me backward. I hit the ground hard but kept my staff raised, clenching my jaw as I fought to sustain the barrier. It wobbled dangerously, sparks cascading from two vicious cracks. One more blow would shatter it, but the massive impact had sent the elephant reeling too. It staggered sideways into the mirror maze, flattening the fence and crashing through an outer wall. Fighting to stay upright, the elephant trampled more of the building. A tusk slashed through the cupola in an explosion of dust and debris. The remaining walls collapsed as countless mirrors shattered beneath its massive feet.
The Dreamweaver!
Kayla cried. My stomach lurched, but not for the child. A being that powerful wouldn't be crushed. But I wasn't as confident in the container. If it were damaged and the Dreamweaver freed, even greater catastrophe would follow.
I need to find Eugene, Margaret cried, breaking from Kayla's grip.
Go with her, I told Kayla. We need to know how he's been accessing the cellar so we can get the Dreamweaver out of there.
Can you handle this? She asked.
The elephant was staggering from the wreckage now, ears flapping to clear the dust. I'll figure something out, I said. With a trusting nod, she took off after Margaret. I sidestepped from the wreckage, waving my sword and staff overhead to catch the elephant's attention. Beyond it, some movement distracted my eye. Two figures were crawling from the debris, one in an oversized jacket, the other dragging a sleeping bag behind him. The vagrants from the mirrors. They stared around, as bewildered as I was by their sudden liberation, before breaking into a shambling run toward the park exit. Meanwhile, the elephant had caught my antics. Pawing the ground with a massive front foot, it released another shrieking blast. But when it charged, it wasn't toward me. It was heading straight for Tabitha's carrier. I pulled energy from my shield and reshaped it in front of Tabitha. The elephant burst through the still-forming barrier. With a dip of its head, it wedged a tusk under the carrier and sent it skyward. Tabitha yowled as her container tumbled end over end. As the carrier plummeted again, the elephant reared up on its hind legs, eyes raging, front feet poised to stomp. I thrust my sword. Vigore! The force blast struck the carrier, knocking it sideways. The elephant's crushing blow missed, sending the colossus staggering onto a knee. With a second invocation, I snagged the carrier and yanked it toward me. It slammed into my chest with breath-stealing force, but I managed to embrace it. "Are you all right?" I gasped, lowering the carrier carefully.
"What do you think?" Tabitha snapped. "My stomach was just turned into a spin cycle. I never considered that a building could hold a grudge."
"Grudge? What are you talking about?"
"Well, I did burn it down that time."
I remembered Eugene's mention of the hotel's fiery end. That was you?
The owner was being a condescending ass, though I can't quite recall why.
Probably something to do with her feasting on his patrons' souls, but another realization was dawning on me. If Tabitha's joyful memories had resurrected the hotel, then maybe her memory of torching it... "Okay, listen," I said quickly. "I want you to think about how you lit it up."
"Really, darling? I'm a little busy trying not to sick up all over myself."
I'd taken the wrong tack. You never asked Tabitha for a favor. "Wasn't that fun, though?" I nudged. "Joyful, even?"
"I'd like to think it was one of my finer moments," she allowed.
"I'll bet. The smoke, the spreading flames, getting to see fire plume from that big head." I looked from Tabitha's curving lips to the Elephant Hotel. It was upright again, but its eyes were rolling wildly as though trying to spot something just outside its vision. Suddenly, smoke burst from the weathered slats along its flanks. It was working. "Oh, this is fun," Tabitha purred, her smile opening around her canines. With a screeching blast, the Elephant Hotel began bucking like a Brahmin bull. I scanned the area, relieved to see the park had emptied out. Ada's fortune-telling booth stood vacant. But then I spotted an elderly figure near the boardwalk. He was clutching something to the chest of his brown suit as he hurried away. "Eugene!" I shouted. He glanced back, eyes huge. They cut from me to the smoking elephant and surrounding destruction. But instead of horror, his eyes seemed to narrow with resolve. He pulled his parcel closer and broke into a run. "Eugene, wait!" I called, but he only ran faster. Damn it. I looked down at the carrier. What I was about to do was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, but I had little choice. I released the locking invocation. The door sprang open and Tabitha squeezed out, eyes blazing with predatory purpose as she stared up at the flailing elephant. "Burn, you bloated cow," she seethed. "Burn!" "Just stay out of its way and keep thinking fire," I said. "I'll be back." As flames broke from the elephant's frame, I sprinted toward where I'd last seen Eugene. At the boardwalk, I grabbed the rail to halt my forward momentum, chest heaving. No sign of him. My eyes swept the beach below. How in the hell had he just vanished? "Looking for the old gaffer?" I spun around, more startled than I should have been, to find Boardwalk Benny right behind me. His hair was smushed flat on one side, suggesting he'd just woken from a nap. "Oh, right," he said, shaking sand from his jacket. "Was supposed to announce meself first." "No worries," I panted. "Eugene Marsh, did you see where he went?" He nodded past me toward the pier. "Caught him hurrying that way, but lost sight of him in the smoke." He squinted toward the sound of Tabitha's cackles and the stamping elephantine colossus, its body now bathed in angry flames. "Say, do you know what all the commotion's about?" "Long story," I replied, already moving in the direction he'd indicated. "But thanks." I threw the last part over my shoulder to sound like less of a jerk, but I needed to reach the Dreamweaver. "Might try the lifeguard station," Benny called after me. "The one near the pier there." The low building with its distinctive red cross wasn't far ahead, and Benny had steered me true before. I leaped down a set of wooden steps and staggered through the sand, shoes filling with grit. A back door stood ajar, its padlock lying in the sand as if hastily opened. Bingo. I threw the door wide and found myself staring into a storage space filled with rescue equipment and plastic storage containers. "Eugene!" I called. When no answer came, I picked my way around life preservers, coiled ropes, and more containers. I soon reached a secluded corner and back, where bare wooden floorboards met cinderblock walls. With a steadying breath, I opened my wizard's vision. The space darkened before exploding into astral patterns. A fading impression of Eugene's figure showed him prying up a section of floor and disappearing beneath it. My face was already prickling with dread as the room swam back into view. I found where a piece of floorboard had splintered off, hooked my fingers underneath, and pulled. A square section lifted on a hidden hinge, exposing a metal ladder that vanished down a mine-like shaft. "Great," I muttered. Chapter 13. The ladder rattled under my weight as I descended, trying my best to ignore the fist squeezing my chest. Blue-white light from my pendant illuminated an earthen corridor supported by rough-hewn timber beams. An old smuggling route? There were rumors of goblin-mined tunnels throughout the city. Eugene may have discovered that one ran under Coney Island. And if it led to Blackwell's cellar, that may have also explained his manic, laundry-obsessive phase, when he'd wanted to hide evidence of his underground movements. I hurried down the long corridor, only slowing when I picked up the sound of grunting. It was soon accompanied by flashes of light where the corridor ended. Eugene stood before a heavy wooden door, headlamp bobbing frantically as he threw his shoulder against it. Fallen debris from the elephant's rampage must have jammed it shut. "Damn it!" he hissed, stepping back to catch his breath. "Eugene, it's Everson," I called, approaching cautiously in case he was armed, too. "I met you earlier today." Yes, I know who you are," he replied irritably, not turning around. "But this area is off limits. You can't be down here." He pressed his shoulder against the door again, but it wouldn't budge more than a few inches. I stopped just behind him. No weapon in sight, just the parcel I'd seen him carrying on the boardwalk, now tucked under his arm. He stepped back with another curse, his pale forehead slick with sweat. "I know about the Dreamweaver," I said. His headlamp snapped toward me. The light hit above my eyes, allowing me to see the horror that seized his weathered features.
"You've come to take it from us,"
he said in a hollow voice. That was why I'd come, but I had to tread carefully. "Eugene, it's waking up. That's what's causing all this chaos. It's an extremely powerful being that's overwhelming its containment. You don't want it destroying Coney Island, do you?" I was appealing to the one thing I knew for certain he loved. His headlamp swung back to the door.
"I'm going to fix it,"
he insisted. His shoes dug into the tunnel floor as he set his shoulder against the wood again.
"Eugene, do you think I don't know what's happening in my own park?"
he snapped, wheeling to face me.
"I know about the danger. I know it's waking up, but I have this to put it back to sleep."
He yanked the parcel from under his arm and thrust it toward my face. It was wrapped in oiled canvas and bound with twine. The otherworldly scent that wafted from it, like honey mixed with strokes of aurora borealis, told me what I'd already begun to suspect. The parcel had originated in Fairy. I was preparing to warn him of the danger of mixing magics when a tremor ran through the tunnel, raining dirt from the timber supports overhead. Eugene's headlamp beam wavered as he steadied himself against the doorframe.
"It's getting worse," he muttered.
When I eyed the parcel again, it was with a new thought. If the component worked as advertised, the Dreamweaver would fall back asleep. The violent manifestations would cease, allowing time for a member of my order to arrive and handle the situation, and Eugene, properly. As he gathered himself for another assault on the door, I placed a hand on his arm. "Here, let me try." He eyed me warily, but then stepped aside. I inserted the end of my cane through the narrow opening and called light to the opal. Indeed, Blackwell's cellar. The door was concealed behind a wall of shelving, explaining why we hadn't spotted it earlier. A spillage of heavy stone crockery blocked the door's swing. The far side of the cellar had collapsed entirely, but I caught the gleaming outline of the Dreamweaver's container, still intact. I whispered a force invocation, sending the crockery skittering away. As the door swung wide, Eugene pushed past me, his headlamp beam dancing across the messy cellar as he made straight for the container.
"Don't worry, little one."
He knelt and peered through the silver latticework.
"Papa's here."
The tenderness in his voice caught me off guard. Was this affection for the imprisoned being, or was he speaking to Coney Island itself? He glanced at me suspiciously over his shoulder as he began picking at the twine.
"Who are you, really?"
he demanded. "My name is Everson, but I'm a magic user." He didn't even blink.
"And you came because of Sonny?"
"Sonny? Oh, the Dreamweaver? No, I came for lunch and a ride on the Wonder Wheel, but one of my memories attacked me." He grunted knowingly, his fingers working faster at the knots. "That led me to the mirror maze in search of an enchanted item," I said. "You see, my job is to keep dangerous spellbooks and items out of the hands of, well, mortals. I didn't realize the enchanted item in question was Sonny here." Eugene's hands stilled on the twine.
"Just so you know, it wasn't my plan to keep him detained. There's no door on this thing. I couldn't saw or torch it open either. Couldn't even lift it. When I tried, I got the shock of my life."
He shot a worried glance at the container.
"And the whole time I didn't believe Sonny was real. Thought he was some sophisticated illusion Blackwell had rigged up."
"So you poured through Blackwell's notebooks?"
"That's how I learned what Sonny was."
Eugene resumed attacking the twine.
"And according to Blackwell's notes, he wasn't being harmed. He wrote that their natural condition is sleep, and I believed that."
I noticed his use of past tense, believed. After the way he'd lied to me so convincingly at the Historical Society, I'd been prepared to face a villain, but he was clearly struggling with the morality question.
"I cared for him the best I could," he continued. "Blackwell left detailed notes."
"And it just so happened that Sonny's presence spurred Coney Island's recovery?" I asked, testing him.
"Well, yes," he admitted. "That's part of his magic, and the revival here was nothing short of magical. I suppose I did become attached to the effects, but as long as he was sleeping, what was the harm?"
He paused.
But a couple weeks ago had me asking questions all over again. Sonny's breathing turned erratic. He started twitching and making faces, like a colicky infant. I'd never seen that before.
I nodded, remembering what I'd observed earlier.
And the effects on the park? Eugene shook his head. If he wasn't being harmed, then why were the memories turning hostile? I didn't know what else to do except try to put him back to sleep.
Though I'd been listening warily, could I really blame him? A powerful Fey Lord could acquire and discard a Dreamweaver like a piece of furniture, no consequences. But for mortals like Cornelius Blackwell and Eugene Marsh, the Dreamweaver was a force far beyond their comprehension and capacity. Tearing away the last of the twine, Eugene unwrapped the oiled cloth, having to unfold it several times. At the center sat a milky sphere about the size of a shooter marble. The pearl pulsed with soft moonlight. I stepped closer. Where did you get this?
I tracked down a merchant from Fairy.
He pronounced the word carefully, as if still testing its reality.
When I explained what was happening, she said she could procure a solution. Wasn't cheap, he added with a bitter laugh. The courier delivered it just minutes ago, riding a horse-drawn carriage. Haven't seen one of those in Coney Island since, well, I suppose the early photographs.
He'd been staring at the pearl, but now his face creased with worry as he looked over the cage.
The courier said to put it anywhere, and it would know what to do. But I don't... How am I supposed to...
Would you mind if I have a look? I asked. He drew his arm away, grip tightening around the pearl. Listen, I just want to make sure it's safe, I said. Sometimes Fey magics don't play well together. The last thing we need is to accidentally transport Coney Island to another dimension or reduce it to a smoking crater. He hesitated, fingers white around the precious object, before placing it carefully in my outstretched palm. The pearl radiated warmly between my fingers. As I brought it toward the container, a sound like soft whispers took up. In my vision, I caught misty tendrils reaching for the latticework, a latent sleeping enchantment. When I sensed the container reaching back, I nodded. This will work, I said. But why haven't you told your wife? His face snapped toward me.
You've spoken to Margaret about this?
Uh-oh. Under the dreamlike influence of the pearl, I'd let my inner thoughts slip out. Before I could backpedal, another voice spoke up.
I've suspected for a long time.
We turned to find Margaret stepping from the passageway behind her flashlight beam. Eugene moved in front of the container.
What are you doing here? He stammered. Shouldn't I be asking you that? She said. Why didn't you tell me?
Eugene glanced at Kayla, who was entering behind her, then over at me, lips compressing.
Don't you dare blame him, Margaret said. He was honest with me, more honest than my own husband. And I asked you, Eugene, I asked you time and again what was going on for 50 years, and you said nothing.
Well, what was I supposed to say? He shot back. That I'd inherited a magical child? Kayla caught my eye and signaled for me to stay quiet. Somehow, some way, this long-overdue conversation was important.
You could have shown me.
Margaret jabbed her flashlight beam at the container.
I wouldn't have doubted you after seeing the child with my own eyes. The fact is, I already have.
She shook her head in despair.
How could you? I wanted to show you, he said, eyes dipping as he stepped away from the container. But with no way to free him, the guilt, the shame, Margaret, I couldn't stand the idea of you having to wrestle with those two.
She regarded him carefully. He'd lied to her before, but the big secret was out. At last, she sighed through her nose.
If all you say is true, then you'll have no problem with Everson here sending him home.
Eugene turned to me.
You can do that?
Well, not me, but my superiors. It's a matter of contacting them. When Eugene peered through the latticework, I caught the uncertainty in his gaze, not just a reflection of his concern for the magical being, which I believed now was genuine, but the fear of what would become of Coney Island. Margaret stepped up behind him and rested a hand on his shoulder.
It's the right thing to do, Eugene, she said.
Reaching up, he wrapped her hand in his and nodded.
Yes, I think it would be best.
Okay, great. I released my breath. It's probably going to take a little time for someone to get here, so we'll drop him back to sleep in the meantime. And not a moment too soon. Beyond the latticework, the Dreamweaver's eyelids were parting. Translucent orbs shimmered with color. I extended the pearl, grateful there would be no final battle for a change. But before I could place it against the container, Kayla lunged over and seized my wrist. "No!" she cried. Chapter 14. "Hey!" I clapped my other hand over the pearl to keep it from spilling. "What are you doing?" I stared at Kayla, all too aware of the Dreamweaver's quickening breaths and the fresh rumbles of chaos in the park above. Beside us, the marshes watched with confusion and growing alarm. Her grip tightened on my wrist. "We can't do this." "Why? Is there some consequence to the magic's mixing?" "Sleep," she shuddered. "Profound sleep." "That's kind of the point here." "No, Everson, bad sleep." I studied the pearl in my palm. "Is this too strong?" With a clearing of his throat, Eugene stepped forward. "Blackwell came up with some mechanisms for regulating the container's power. I've made repairs and adjustments to them over the years. I may be able to dampen the effects of the sleep." But Kayla shook her head. "It's not the strength." Her voice had changed, but not in a way that suggested augury. As she peered at the cage, I watched her pupils contract to pinpricks. "It's like being in a too small box," she said, her voice scraping out like a knife over toast. "No, it's worse. It's like being comatose but awake, trapped in your own head inside your recurring dreams." Her breathing picked up. "It's a cold, claustrophobic sleep that never ends, Everson, that never, ever ends." When colors shimmered oil-like across her irises, understanding went off in my gut. She was bonding with the Dreamweaver, or it with her. I looked at the being stirring behind the latticework, wings flickering with increasing agitation. Had Kayla been called to Coney Island to ease its pain and isolation, or was she being manipulated into doing its bidding? "Release it," she whispered, stoking my suspicion of the latter. "Kayla, listen to me." I shook her shoulder. "What is your augury telling you?" Her gaze remained fixed on the cage. When I shook her again, her eyes cut over, pupils still contracted. "What are the consequences of freeing it?" I pressed. She stared at me in incomprehension before her pupils suddenly dilated. "The pain ends," she said after a moment, her augur's voice returning. "Beyond that, I just see threads branching in all directions." Not surprising. Fey beings were notoriously hard to read. I tried a different approach. "Earlier you said we were nearing a point of no return. What did that mean?" "For the Dreamweaver," she said. "I see that now. Its next sleep will be final." "And that's coming from your divination, or from the Dreamweaver itself?" She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Fresh colors shimmered across her irises. Damn it. Under the Dreamweaver's influence, I couldn't trust a word she was saying. "Please, Everson." The scraping urgency returned to her voice. "It can't stay caged like this. It can't go back to sleep." The cellar shuddered again. Larger pieces of debris crashed down around us. The tumult wasn't coming from the outside, I realized, but from the Dreamweaver's cage. The sphere on top pulsed erratically, while sparks sizzled from the jury-rigged components, the entire apparatus struggling to contain the awakening being. Eugene wrapped his arms around Margaret. "Everson?" he prompted, eyes darting meaningfully to the pearl in my hand. I stared at it, weighing my choices. Apply it to the container and all this madness would stop. But what if I was condemning Sonny to unimaginable torment, even death? Or did I speak the release glyph and risk catastrophe for everyone in this cellar, for Coney Island, possibly far beyond? The amplifier buzzed like a blown speaker. The tonnage of rubble crashed onto Blackwell's desk. I threw up a shield just as dust billowed around us, dimming our lights. Margaret cried out against her husband's shoulder. "For pity's sake!" Eugene shouted over the turmoil. "What are you waiting for?" Certainty. That was what I was waiting for. But with Kayla bonded to the stirring Dreamweaver and the cellar collapsing around us, certainty wasn't coming. All I had was a memory from our first case together, when Kayla had assured me everything would work out. Work out how? I'd asked, skeptically. It just will, she'd said. I can feel it. And it had, just like all of our cases since, but we'd never faced stakes like this. As fresh rumbles shook the foundation, Margaret added her voice to Eugene's pleas. Inside the container, the Dreamweaver was rising to its feet. Kayla watched me with eyes that shimmered in and out of focus, her expression caught between a fervent plea and something not entirely her own. Drawing my friend closer, I whispered, "You haven't led us wrong yet." In the absence of certainty, I was going with trust. I spoke the release glyph. For a moment, everything went still. Then a low roar filled the cellar and the container began to glow. Smoke hissed up, followed by bursts of glass. The components Blackwell and Eugene had jury-rigged. I squinted, unable to look away as the four of us stepped back. The container's glow brightened, seeming to dissolve the latticework, the only thing standing between the awakened Dreamweaver and us. From the fading prison, a child's silhouette emerged. A mounting dread compressed my heart. Moonlight hair stirred around the child's deceptively delicate form. Gossamer wings extended slowly from its back. The Dreamweaver stepped free of the vanishing cage, its iridescent eyes lighting up like searchlights. I hunted for some kind of intent in them, but found only an unfathomable dance of colors. With a soft cry, Kayla collapsed, her bond to the being severed, or overwhelmed. Terror broke through me, but before I could drop down to check on her, the Dreamweaver pinned me with its stare. Heat burst in my palm. I grunted as the sleeping pearl I'd been grasping escaped my fingers as steam. Have to cast, I thought desperately. Have to keep the others safe somehow. My cane trembled in my grip, but darkness crashed into me first. Chapter 15. I was seated on something cold and hard. In front of me, a pattern grew from the darkness, a grid of small squares. I peered around. The square pattern surrounded me on all sides, sending my heart thumping sickly in my throat. This is a cage. The Dreamweaver had locked me, and no doubt the others, in extraplanar prisons. Retribution for its captivity of, more than 100 years? Already I could feel my sanity jittering at the seams. I wasn't going to make it 100 hours. Get a grip, Everson. Think. I was no longer wearing my coat, satchel, or pendant. My cane wasn't in hand. When I went to feel for it, my arms wouldn't move. My legs were dead weight, too. I tried to shout a raw invocation, but my voice was gone. Kayla's ominous words floated back to me. It's like being comatose, but awake. Trapped in your own head inside your recurring dreams. It's a cold, claustrophobic sleep that never ends, Everson. That never, ever ends. As I stared at the cage wall, a half-sob, half-giggle shook through my mind. So this was it, then? An eternity of just this? Being able to make it 10 hours suddenly felt ambitious. There was an abrupt jerk, and the entire cage creaked and shimmied into an upward lift. Did I even want to know what was happening? I closed my eyes and concentrated on the mental prism I used to cast through. That was when a salt-tinged breeze brushed my face and fluttered my hair. I shot my eyes open. Beyond the cage's interlocking squares, the darkness was fading like mist. Patterns were sharpening into focus. I watched in disbelief as the Manhattan skyline took slow shape in the distance. To my left, a sandy beach extended to an expanse of ocean, and below my feet, whirling colors grew into a teeming amusement park. The sun broke through, making the scene dance with glints and sparkles. This wasn't a cage. I was in a gondola on the Wonder Wheel. "Oh dear," someone said. I turned. On the bench beside me, wearing a striped sleeveless blouse, sat my grandmother. She was peering dubiously at the ceiling of our gondola as we rocked back and forth. I wanted to throw my arms around her, but I was too dumbstruck. When her eyes met mine, concern lines ringed them. "I didn't think this one was supposed to move," she said. I tried to speak, but like before, nothing emerged. I was smiling, though, jolts of anticipation going off in my stomach. Not only was I on the Wonder Wheel, I was reliving the memory of my first ride. "We must have gotten in the wrong line," Nana went on. There had been 2 lines, one for the stationary gondolas and one for the swinging ones. Where the lines split, I distracted her and steered us toward the swinging ones. I'd forgotten that mischievous little detail. Gripping the side of the bench, Nana wrapped her other arm around me, enveloping me in her comforting scent of vanilla extract and hand lotion. In my adult mind, her closeness brought me to the brink of tears, but in the memory, it was all my 6-year-old self could do to keep from giggling, because as the gondola rose, it began tipping forward, and then my stomach was swooning as the gondola dropped and slid along its famous tracks. It felt as if we were going to shoot right off the Wonder Wheel and plummet into the park below. My excitement emerged as a holler. Nana screamed too and clutched me closer. But at the last moment, the gondola rose up, stopped, then slid into reverse and dipped again.
"Are you all right, honey?" she asked urgently. "Did that scare you? Do you want to get off?"
"Nana, we're 10 stories up," I pointed out, or rather the 6-year-old boy in my memory did. As the gondola's rocking slowed, she drew me back to peer at my face. When she saw that I was grinning, one side of her own mouth curled up.
"You little stinker," she chuckled. "Did you do this on purpose?"
The gondola creaked and shifted.
"Here we go again!"
I cried. Nana's eyes went wide and we held on to each other this time. The gondola dipped and slid forward, picking up speed. When it crested again at the last moment, Nana's cry turned into a spirited giggle. We dipped in reverse while the wheel churned us higher. I knew this had been fun, but I'd forgotten how much fun. It was something only a child could know, and I was getting to see the child come out in Nana.
"Woo-wee!"
I cried as we sped forward again.
"Woo-wee!"
She joined in, kicking her legs. By the time the Wonder Wheel took us to its apex, Nana and I were giddy and breathless. The view around us looked like a Technicolor dreamscape. But it was real. This was exactly how it had been, and it still lived inside of me. Nana dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief.
My,
she managed between giggles. My heart was bursting with joy. I wanted to tell her I loved her, that I missed her every single day, but I was still the boy in the memory, enchanted by the present, no concept that moments like these were finite and people moved on from our lives. Fortunately, he chose that moment to squeeze her hand and lean into her side, because the scene was fading to black again. "Everson?" someone said. I came to on another bench, but this one was wooden and secured to the ground. Kayla was gripping my arm. Behind her, the Wonder Wheel loomed over the park. In my perplexed state, I squinted, thinking I might spot Nana and myself in one of the gondolas, but the ride was still and empty now.
"Everson," she repeated. "Can you hear me?"
I nodded slowly, then remembered her collapsing beside me. "Hey, are you all right?" I asked, snapping to.
"Yeah, fine,"
she said, but a melancholy weighed on her eyes. Before I could ask her more, she peered past me. Eugene and Margaret Marsh were sitting on our other side. They blinked and stirred, then consulted one another quietly before realizing we were there.
"How did we end up outside like this?"
Margaret asked. No one had an answer. The last any of us remembered, we'd been in the cellar, and strangely, I had all of my belongings again, my right hand gripping my cane. Had the Dreamweaver spared us? In the park, faint columns of smoke rose here and there, and some rides appeared to have been knocked askew, but there was no sign of the elephantine colossus or any other manifestations. Eugene regarded the damage soberly before a light stirred in his eyes.
"Say," he said, "did anyone else have a memory before you came to?"
"I did," Margaret answered.
"You and I were young again. We were touring the space on Surf Avenue that was to become our home and office. We were already planning how we were going to use each room."
Her shifting eyes glimmered with the memory.
"It was all as clear as the day it happened."
Eugene, who'd been nodding the whole time, said,
"That was my memory as well."
They grasped one another's hands and looked over at me. My memory returned on a stomach-dipping surge of joy and laughter. I rode the Wonder Wheel with my grandmother again. It was... There were no adequate words to describe it, but there didn't need to be. I could still feel it. Amazing! We turned to Kayla. "Mine wasn't exactly a memory, but..." A smile crimped her lips. "I had the privilege of experiencing its return home." "The Dreamweaver?" I said. "You're sure?" When she nodded, tears spilled from her eyes. I could have cried too, in relief. Freeing the being could have ended in so many disastrous ways, but once again she'd been right. It had all worked out. I handed her a handkerchief from my coat pocket and hugged her to my side. Eugene rose from the bench with his wife.
I still don't quite understand your roles here, but thank you.
He shook my hand warmly and then Kayla's.
Thank you both.
He didn't elaborate, maybe an effect of our collective shock, but he didn't need to. He'd inherited something he'd never asked for, managed it as best he could, however imperfectly, and now he was finally free of the burden. With a heavy sigh, he surveyed the demolished mirror maze and the rest of the park. The question was written on his face. How would Coney Island survive without the magic? They're real, I said. The memories. He raised his eyebrows, and Margaret stepped around to face me. I don't know why our flashbacks happened, I continued. Maybe it was the Dreamweaver's parting gift for freeing it, but whatever the case, they weren't amplified or augmented. They're real, a living part of us, a part of everyone who's ever visited Coney Island. The memories are the magic now. I gestured around the park. Your work at the Historical Society? That's the amplifier. Margaret looked at her husband hopefully.
It can be just like our early years.
Then I suppose we should get started, he said, smiling and tipping me a wink. As they departed for home, Tabitha came waddle-trotting from the park, her head raised pompously. Her hair was liberally singed, including most of her tail, but her eyes blazed with her victory by fire. She jumped onto the bench between Kayla and me, settling her bulk with regal authority. Hey, thanks for taking care of that, I said. She ignored me and turned pointedly to Kayla. I believe the park is safe again. Catching the not-so-subtle hint, Kayla returned a compassionate smile that made Tabitha wince. My augury tells me that Ada will be here shortly, she said. I'll have her call Minnie to arrange for a special dinner service. Tabitha peered over a shoulder at me. And I'll require 3 Mermaid Tails for my heroism. Chapter 16. Ha! I barked from my reading chair. Tabitha stirred on the divan, ears flattening above her squinting eyes. Do you mind? Sorry, but you have to hear this. I chuckled again, more quietly this time, and adjusted the Marsh's book on my lap. This is from a section titled Personalities of Coney Island. Ready? I cleared my throat. Benjamin Kellerman, known affectionately as Boardwalk Benny, was a beloved vagrant who frequented the boardwalk in the 1970s and 80s. He offered a cheery word to everyone, was quick with directions, and had an uncanny knack for reuniting lost children with their parents. He never asked for compensation and only accepted what was freely offered. Sadly, he drowned while rescuing a young woman caught in a riptide. The woman survived, and today a plaque at the western end of the boardwalk commemorates Boardwalk Benny for his heroism and legendary good nature. Coney Island misses you. When I held up the photo of him, Tabitha returned a bland stare. And the man who helped us yesterday with a spectral imprint? A ghost. She snorted dismissively. That wasn't obvious. I regarded the photo again. The way he kept popping up might have been a clue, but otherwise, not really, I admitted. Well, I can't be expected to do everything for you. That her insults were less biting than usual this morning told me she was still spent. 30 minutes after getting to burn the Elephant Hotel to the ground for a second time, she'd passed out in her carrier. I had Minnie prepare her Mermaid Tails to go. Yes, tails, plural. I caved and allowed her the 3. As Tabitha heaved herself onto her other side, a knock sounded on the door. Silence mode, I reminded her as I got up. Through the peephole, my friend waved back. Never mind, it's Kayla. Tabitha moaned. Can you tell her we're not home? Sure, I'll do it nice and loud. Feel free to chime in. Tabitha dragged a blanket over her head as I unbolted the door. Morning, Mr. Wizard. Kayla hugged me and kissed my cheek. Got any coffee? She asked, already heading to the kitchen. Yeah, but wait, you've got to hear this first. I hustled to retrieve the Marsh's book. 3 times yesterday, this guy named Boardwalk Benny helped me. Turns out, oh, you mean the ghost? She said. I stopped, my enthusiasm deflating. You knew, too? I sensed him during my guided wanderings. A little suspicious of me, but he seemed like a sweetheart. Okay. Wow. I muttered, adding ghost identification to the long list of skills I still needed to master. From the coffee warmer, I poured Kayla and myself 2 mugs of Colombian dark roast. She hoisted herself onto the kitchen counter, tapping her heels against the cabinet as she took her first sip. I studied her eyes. No lingering effects of her bond with the Dreamweaver that I could see. Her Dylan phase had ended too, apparently, because she'd washed out her curls and trimmed it to a modest bob. Jeans, a wool sweater, and square glasses completed her basic look. It took me a moment to realize she was quieter than usual. "Some case, huh?" I said.
"Everson, I have to tell you something."
She leveled her gaze at me.
"I'm leaving."
I nearly spilled my coffee. "Leaving?" I repeated, setting my mug on the counter. "As in New York?" She nodded.
"I don't belong here. Not anymore."
"Well, what about your work, all the people you're helping?"
"Meeting you, discovering my augury, placing it in the service of others, it's been an incredible gift. And yet I can't even inhabit my own skin. You've seen it. All these personalities I've worn and shed."
She released a tired laugh.
"Nothing fits. Not for very long, anyway. I used to think it was me, but now I know I'm not where I'm supposed to be. The guises were just distractions."
Remembering yesterday's melancholy look, I said, "This has something to do with the Dreamweaver, doesn't it?"
"I picked up its distress call as an augur," she replied, nodding. "But I bonded with it because this isn't my home either."
Concern furrowed my brow. "So where would you go?"
"There's a community of augurs out there. I've felt their pull for a while now. I've put it off, but it's time. These past 2 weeks of working with Ada showed me how much more I need to grow and develop."
I struggled for something to say, something that would at least get her to reconsider, but this wasn't whimsical Kayla. Her poise, the depth of her gaze, told me this was coming from her augury, and everything she was saying rang true. "When?" I asked.
"Tonight."
My heart caved a little. "I was afraid you'd say that."
"You and my dad both. We're spending the day together before he takes me to the train station."
I looked away and released a forlorn breath. "So who am I supposed to talk Dreamweavers and Babarogas with now?" Smiling sympathetically, she hopped down from the counter and took my hands.
"Everson, I wouldn't have been able to come to this decision without you. You listened to me. You helped me realize my true nature. And yesterday you—"
Her eyes gleamed.
"You trusted me when everything told you not to."
"Well, if it had gone sideways, I definitely would have held it against you." She snuffed a laugh.
"I'm really going to miss you. But do you remember what I divined about your future?"
I thought back to our first case together. "You said I'd meet my father."
"And the other prediction?"
she prompted. She was referring to the one she'd made following our second case in the wake of our almost kiss. "You mean about my future partner being someone I've already met?"
"Someone who isn't me," she added.
"So a consolation prize, in other words." She blushed and squeezed my hands. Then her gaze deepened as it roamed the spacious apartment, perceiving beyond the present.
"It may not seem so now, but your life is going to be very full soon, and there's something else I've foreseen."
Her eyes returned to mine.
"You're more than just a magic user."
"I've certainly been called a lot of other things." I expected another laugh, but a pale glow had taken up in her stare while a beatific smile lifted her lips. She staggered back against the counter.
"Whoa,"
she breathed. I caught her arms. "Whoa, what? Are you okay?" She stared at me for another moment, then blinked her eyes clear.
"Yeah, sorry. I spaced out for a sec."
"You were saying something about me being more than a magic user?" Her brow beetled as she thought back, but then she shrugged.
"That happens sometimes. My augury snags on something but doesn't bother sharing it. You'll just have to stay alive long enough to find out."
She winked, then downed the rest of her coffee and slipped her hands around my elbow.
"Walk me to the door?"
I escorted her slowly, wanting to preserve these last moments. On the divan, Tabitha was sleeping with her back to us, patches showing where I'd brushed out her burnt hair. When Kayla hesitated, I patted her hand. "Better you don't," I whispered. "I'll tell her." Tabitha would only have responded to Kayla's farewell with a colorful version of good riddance, and I didn't want that for her. Reluctantly, I twisted the 3 deadbolts and opened the door. "When will you be back?"
She stepped into the corridor and whirled to face me. I can't see that far ahead. Too many possible futures.
Well, listen, in all of them, you're always welcome here. Her chestnut green eyes twinkled with moisture.
I know, Everson.
Take care of yourself. She touched my truncated right earlobe.
You too.
Our kiss above the warded threshold crackled with energy, but it spoke to friendship more than intimacy. Too soon she was mouthing goodbye and waving her fingers. I watched until she disappeared into the stairwell. Then I closed the door and pressed my forehead to the frame to keep from tearing up. It didn't work.
Is she gone yet?
Tabitha murmured. Wiping my eyes, I straightened. Yeah. She rolled over to face me.
I caught the end of that. I'm so sorry, darling.
Somehow her grin undermined the sympathy message.
I suppose now's as good a time as any to announce that I'll no longer be working with you either.
Even after yesterday, you seemed to actually enjoy yourself.
Perhaps, she allowed, but it was a lot of work for some crappy fish sticks.
Why did that not surprise me? I looked from her to the cat door I'd installed in her window. I'd warned her before that the alternative would be patrolling the apartment ledge, but we would wage that battle another time. I retrieved my mug of coffee from the kitchen and sank down into my reading chair.
I just realized something, darling.
What's that? I asked, wary of her savoring tone.
You never got your ride on the Wonder Wheel.
Oh, yeah. Dang. I hid my smile behind my mug. What I had gotten was so much richer than an actual ride, especially one that would have involved Tabitha, and I still believed what I'd told the Marshes. Memories like mine, laughing like a lunatic with Nana on the Wonder Wheel, feeling completely safe and loved, would continue to support Coney Island. But a sadness enveloped me as I understood my moments with Kayla were memories now, too. She would join Nana in that sense. I considered the Dreamweaver's gift a look back. Kayla had also left me a gift, anticipation for what was to come. Meeting my father, building a future with a woman I'd apparently already met, becoming more than a magic user. She also spoke of a full life. I sipped my coffee. Opposite me, sunlight fell through the bay window, haloing Tabitha's ginger hair in a way that made her almost majestic. There was the past and the future, but there was also the present. And right now, that was me and Tabitha. Maybe the thing to do was enjoy it while it lasted. Thank you, I said. She cast me a suspicious squint.
For what?
For being a reliable constant in my life. For being you. She seemed to consider whether that was a compliment or an insult before repositioning her bulk on the divan.
Well, if you expect me to stick around, you're going to need to splurge on a much thicker cushion.
I couldn't help but chuckle. She wasn't wrong. You've got it, Tabby. Thanks for listening to Dream On, the fifth and final book in the Croft and Tabby series. If you enjoyed this story, please like and comment to let us know. And don't forget to subscribe for more audiobooks set in the Croftverse. For Everson Croft's backstory and to learn how he and Tabitha met, be sure to check out the Prof Croft prequels, also available on this channel. When you're ready for the main series, the 32-hour Prof Croft box set is now on Audible. Dream On, a Croft and Tabby short, was written by Brad Magnarella. Narrated by James Patrick Cronin, a member of SAG-AFTRA. Production coordination by Candace Lawrence. Post-production by Mike Straza. Copyright 2025 by Brad Magnarella. Production copyright 2025 by Brad Magnarella.